ring. She thought she was going to die, so she started shaking her hands and told him that if he accompanied her home, then her parents would treat him well and give him even more rewards. Jiang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and explained that tomorrow morning he had to go to the night watch, so he couldn't waste any more time. After saying this, he wished her good luck. She stood up, and while she was watching him slowly move away, she caught his attention and asked him to take her home since her house was much closer than the night watch headquarters. There was a teleportation station near her house, and she assured him that he would arrive on time. Although at first he refused, later he decided to listen to her, and several hours later they arrived at the Luo family mansion. This mansion was beautiful and very large, almost like a castle. At the same time, inside the mansion, there were a lot of hooded men prostrated before a woman who was sitting on her throne. A man approached her and informed her about what had happened to her daughter. Upon hearing this, she was shocked as she didn't know how this could be possible. The Xiao family not only stole and killed, but they were also going too far with this lie. Seeing that she was furious, the man asked her to calm her anger towards him, as he was a wretched person who had caused her suffering. Several minutes later, Luo Sandao entered the room, approached her mother, sat beside her, rested her head on her knees, and started crying. Her mother placed her hand on her head and then began to look at her subordinates with a furious gaze. She decided definitively to do something against the Xiao family. Her husband approached her, looked at her intently, extended his hands to the sides, and in a serious voice asked her to calm down, since the most important thing was that Luo Sandao had returned safe and sound. He also added that the Xiao family was a powerful family in the country, and they couldn't mess with them being simple merchants. Jiang stayed silently observing and thought that her real name was Luo Sandao. Her father turned his body towards Jiang, handed him a black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile thanked him for saving their daughter. He also asked him not to get rid of this black card. The mother turned her head towards him, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile told him that he was their benefactor. She had prepared a meal for him so that he could eat peacefully and then leave using their teleportation, which was very fast. Jiang took the black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile told them that he wasn't going to eat. But at that moment, his stomach started growling. He turned red, put his hand behind his head, and with a smile decided to eat a little. Upon seeing this, her father pointed out the place where the food was and decided to organize it immediately, while on the other side her mother put her hand near her face, closed her eyes, and began to smile. The best chefs in the Luo family prepared the food. In several minutes, Jiang ate several dishes until he stacked them one on top of another to form a column. One of the waiters who was bringing another dish approached him, and upon seeing this, became somewhat confused and surprised at the same time. While Jiang had one hand resting on the table and with the other was holding a piece of meat thigh, he thought that as the number of insects increased, his appetite also became greater. Beside him, Luo Sandao was sitting. She turned her head towards him and with a smile asked him not to rush and eat slowly. Next to her were seated her mother and father, who simply closed their eyes and with a joyful smile, silently watched Jiang. Jiang started eating even more. She began to look at him and couldn't help but blush and be somewhat surprised. Her mother, who was enjoying a cup of tea, explained to her father that their daughter said Jiang belonged to the creation class and had divine rank. For her, he was very strange because she didn't know how he had been able to save their daughter from the hands of the Xiao family. Her father put his hand under his chin, started looking at Jiang, and explained to her that although their daughter didn't want to say it, he was sure that Jiang had hidden abilities and wasn't as useless as he seemed. He also added that he was handsome. Both began to look into each other's eyes, and with a smile, they thought that if he could help them fight against the Xiao family and protect their daughter for her entire life, then he could be the perfect person. Her mother approached Jiang, and with a pleasant smile asked him if he had a girlfriend. She also added that in their family, Sandao also didn't have a boyfriend. Her hidden profession was also quite good. Besides being an expert in business, she could also be a financial manager. Her father stood behind him, gave him a thumbs up, and explained that Sandao's body was also very sexy because she had measurements of 36, 24, 36. He also added that they made a perfect couple, and he had even thought of names for their future children. Jiang, who was drinking a glass of water, left it on the table, spit out the water, and was shocked. Upon hearing her parents' proposal, she began to blush like a tomato and wonder what was happening. Without thinking for a second, Jiang ran out and thanked them for their hospitality. He left with the excuse that he was full and still had something urgent to do. Seeing this, her father asked him to wait a little longer as they wanted to talk to him. Sandao approached her father, put her hand over his mouth, and asked him to be quiet. Her mother turned her head towards her and started looking at her with a disappointed look. She sat on the chair. Her father approached her and said that their son-in-law had left. He also added that as his wife, she should go say goodbye to him. Her mother approached them and asked her not to worry since her father had the location of the black card. Wherever he went, they would follow him. Upon hearing this, she grabbed her knees with both hands, closed her eyes, and with a scream asked them to be quiet. She began to look down and started imagining Jong. She thought that although he was handsome and strong, he was also terrifying. And even though he was truly terrifying, there was no doubt that he was handsome and strong. At the same time, in the Xiao family, Xiao Yuanchen, the head of the family, learned that his grandson Qianwu had died. Upon hearing this news, he couldn't help but become furious. With an angry look on his face, he ordered his subordinates to thoroughly investigate the murder. He didn't know who had done it and believed that Xiao Zhengguo was responsible. So he ordered his other grandson to immediately send someone to investigate him. While a man was prostrated before him, another man named Xiao Beihan, who had one hand in his pants pocket, began to approach his grandfather. He extended his other hand to the side and explained that Yuanwu was already over 20 years old and had only reached level 30 of the second transformation, so he was useless. After saying this, he asked him what was lamentable about the death of a useless person and told his grandfather that it wasn't worth getting so angry about it. Xiao Yuanchen, who was sitting in his chair with both hands resting on his knees, started looking at Xiao Beihan and told him that Yuanwu was truly mediocre, nothing compared to him. Therefore, it wasn't a pity that he was dead. He also added that in the end, he was the grandson of him. Even to hit a dog, you had to look at who its owner was. He would like to know who in the country had enough courage to kill someone from the Xiao family. Upon hearing this, Xiao Beihan began to smile, extended his hand forward, and his hand started emitting an evil energy. He asked his grandfather not to worry about this trivial matter since after finishing the Tanjiao camp issue, it didn't matter who was guilty. He would take care of it in place of him. At the same time, Jiang went to the night watch office. He opened the door and entered where Jai Gang and several other people were. He turned his body to one side and was somewhat surprised to see that Jiang had arrived. He began walking towards them, putting his hand behind his head, introducing himself as Jiang Chen, the new member of the night watch. He couldn't help but wonder why there were so many people here. Jai Gang approached him, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, extended the other hand to the side, and with a smile told him that they had been waiting for him. Upon hearing this, Jiang was somewhat surprised. Jai Gang decided to introduce him to the new key members of their group. The first one was Yu Xiaok, a level 45 healer who was in the second stage. She used to be the youngest, but now he had taken away that position from her. Upon hearing this, she put her hand near her mouth, started looking at Jiang, and couldn't help but blush and think that he was very handsome. This was the first time she had worked with someone so good looking. The second member was Duan Feng, a level 49 archer who was also in the second stage. He didn't talk much but was quite conceited. He put his hand on his hip, placed the other one near his forehead, and with a smile told him that he was delighted to meet him. The third member was Chu Biuling, a level 49 warrior. Although his body was small, he was strong and a great talker. He approached Jiang, stood in front of him, closed his eyes, and with a smile explained to him that having a professional member of divine level was an achievement enough to boast about for a lifetime. The fourth member was a woman named Jane Tang, a master who was in the third stage. She was level 61 and belonged to the fire class. She was also a sub-commander. She approached them, placed her hands on Chu Biuling and Jiang's heads, began to caress them, and with a pleasant smile asked them to call her Aunt Tang in the future. She assured them that they would have meat to eat every day. With a pleasant smile, Jiang introduced himself as a humble awakened from the creation class. He asked how he could deserve so much enthusiasm from them. Deep down, he knew that even if it was clear, even if it was of divine level, the spiritual master's creation class was not well regarded by people. Jai Gang put one hand in his pocket, extended the other to the side, and told him that there was nothing wrong with being of the divine level spiritual master creation class. He asked him not to pay attention to idiots who had no good eye and only said nonsense. They all trusted him. Jane Tang put her hands on her hips, turned her head towards him, and with a smile told him that he was special because he had chosen to be one of them. The Night Watch. From now on, this would be his home. Jai Gang approached him, put his arm on his shoulder, and decided to talk about the main issue. He extended his hand to one side and with a serious look, explained that if he wanted to enroll in the Tanjiao training camp, he had to have a level higher than 20. He didn't know if Jiang was. With a calm look, Jiang revealed to him that now he was level 17. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised to see that he had changed job just 3 days ago and was already level 17. He grabbed Jiang by the shoulders, closed his eyes, started laughing out loud, and thought that he had not made a mistake in choosing him. He believed that Jiang truly had divine talent and it wouldn't be difficult for him to advance 3 levels in 3 days. He decided to enroll him in the Tanjiao Genius Camp right away. Jai Gang opened his eyes, turned his head to the side, and saw everyone else staring at him with a serious expression. He put his hand in his pocket, turned his body towards Jiang, and with a serious look asked him if he had gotten into trouble with someone very dangerous in the last 3 days, as there was an unknown 3rd grade master investigating his whereabouts using their divine class. He turned his head to the side, started looking at the ground, and upon hearing that a 3rd grade master was investigating him, he couldn't help but wonder if it could be a member of the Zio family. Jai Gang crossed his arms and told Yu Zio that he was leaving the rest in her hands. Upon hearing this, she responded with a understood. Then, she raised her hands towards the sky, causing a green energy to emanate and form a barrier. She turned her head to the side and explained to everyone that she had placed a protective barrier against espionage around the headquarters so that they could all speak freely without worrying about being spied on. Jiang simply stood still, began to look at her, and couldn't help but wonder what kind of power this was. In a matter of seconds, her power started expanding in all directions, causing the protective barrier to become increasingly larger. Jai Gang approached Jiang, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile asked him if there was something he was hiding, adding that they were all here to help him. The others listened attentively in silence. Jiang lowered his head, began to touch his head with his hand, and with a sad look revealed to everyone that yesterday he had killed Zio Yuanwu from the Zio family. Although he had completely eliminated the traces and the body of him, he wasn't sure if the Zio family had other methods of investigation and tracking. Upon hearing this, everyone was shocked. Jane Tang began to look at Jiang with a terrified expression and asked him if he had really eliminated a member of the Zio family. Jai Gang reached out his hand towards him, started looking at him with a surprised expression, and asked him if he had killed Zio Yuanshen's grandson, the cultivator who was in the 8th stage of Zhenguo. Chu Buling couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering how strong Jiang was to have killed a member of the Zio family. Jiang, who was touching his head with his hand, upon seeing their expressions, thought that he had now caused problems for everyone. Jai Gang began to look at Jiang and explained to everyone that it was well known that the Zio family had committed many evil acts. The young members of the Zio family had caused many problems in recent years. He couldn't help but praise him for doing good by protecting people. He crossed his arms and with a serious look, he remembered that the power of the 8th transformation was undoubtedly terrifying. But according to what he knew, his last grandson was Zio Yuanwu, the most incompetent and least favorite of him. That being said, it was possible that old Zio Yuanshen would not personally intervene. Jane Tang, who had one hand on her waist, extended the other towards him and started looking at him with a determined gaze. She asked him not to worry because if the Zio family sent someone, they, the Night Watch, would protect him since they were not weak. Jiang began to look at Jai Gang with a pleasant gaze and couldn't help but smile and feel happy. He was an orphan, and even though he had had neighbors who had helped him since he was little, this was the first time he felt like having a home. Jai Gang turned his back on him, started to walk away, slightly turned his head towards him and thought that even if Zio Yuanwu was useless, he probably had already reached the 2nd level of cultivation. He quickly approached Jiang, grabbed him by the shoulders, started looking into his eyes, and with a surprised look asked him how he had managed to kill someone of level 30 in the combat class, being an awakened person of level 17 in the creation class. Jiang became somewhat nervous, started sweating, extended his hand towards him and asked him not to get too excited because actually, at that moment, someone had helped him. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him who had helped him. Jiang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile, he revealed that the 3rd daughter of the Luo family who lived in Jiangnan had been the person who had helped him. He also added that she had awakened a hidden defense class. Upon hearing this, everyone started looking at Jiang with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder if he was talking about Luo Sandao, the daughter of the wealthiest merchant family in Jiangnan, the Luo family. Jai Gang approached Jiang, grabbed him by the shoulders again, started shaking him, closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile, praised him because even though the Luo family was not a family of warriors, it couldn't be denied that they were rich. So if someday Jiang found himself in trouble, then the Luo family wouldn't just stand idly by. He began to look at Jai Gang and couldn't help but sweat and wonder what he was doing. At that moment, Jiang's body began to emit a powerful purple energy. Several seconds later, once Jai Gang opened his eyes, he saw that Jiang's body was surrounded by a powerful energy. Quickly, he removed his hands from his shoulder, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be shocked. As sweat was dripping from his face, he began to look at him with a surprised expression and remembered that Luo Sandao had awakened the defense class, so she didn't have much attacking power, which meant that the person who had killed Yuanwu had been Jiang. Jiang extended his hand forward, and the poisonous mist of Little Nine appeared in his palm. He began to stare at it, revealing to everyone that he was actually an awakened person specialized in 2 classes. He revealed to everyone that his other hidden class was poison. Duanfeng, who was standing behind him, started looking at him with a surprised expression and couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what this power was. Jai Gang tried to shake Jiang's hand, asking him how many more secrets he had that he didn't know. But Jiang moved his hand aside because in the palm of his hand was the poisonous mist of Little Nine, and he explained that this was very poisonous, fearing that he wouldn't be able to resist it. The others stayed silent, observing this without interrupting. Just before Jiang could finish his sentence, Jai Gang approached him, shook his hand, then closed his eyes and with a smile reassured him not to worry because he knew how to defend himself well against poisons. Little Nine's poisonous mist gradually began to make contact with Jai Gang's hand. Jane Tang started to stare at their hands, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but wonder what this strange poison was. Several seconds later, once Jai Gang stopped shaking his hand and pulled it back, he saw that his hand had already been poisoned. Upon seeing this, he realized that this was not good. Jiang put his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and told him that this time he had gone too far. Gradually, the poisonous mist began to spread over his hand. He grabbed his wrist with the other hand, stared at Jiang aggressively, and asked him to stop talking nonsense since he hadn't even tried to defend himself against the poison from the beginning. Upon hearing this, Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, closed her eyes and started laughing. Meanwhile, on the other side, Chu Buling sat near Jai Gang's hand and began staring at it intently while wondering what this poison was. Quickly, Jai Gang turned his head back to where Xiao Qi was and asked her to come quickly and help him get rid of the poison. Xiao Qi, who had one hand extended to the side, deactivated the barrier, causing the energy to slowly disappear. She put her other hand near her mouth, closed her eyes, and while laughing she responded to him with a yes. Jiang reminded him again that he had told him that this poison was very strong. He sat on the couch, and while he had one hand resting on his knee, he extended the other where he had the poison to the side. Xiao Qi approached him, closed her eyes, and with a smile, she placed both hands near his hand and using her power, began to heal him. While she was healing him, he turned his head towards Jiang, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile told him that this poison was very good, adding that the more skills he had, the happier he would be. Chu Buling approached them, placed both hands on the arm of the sofa, started staring at Jiang and silently observed him. Several seconds later, once Xiao Qi had completely healed his hand, with a serious look, he began to look at Jiang, and despite him being very talented, he advised him to forget about enrolling in the Tanjiao camp since it was not good to enroll after what had happened with the Xiao family. Although the Tanjiao camp offered many valuable resources, it was most likely that the prodigy of the Xiao family would also participate, so they should not risk it for just a few resources. Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, put a hand on her waist, closed her eyes and began nodding to indicate to him that Jai Gang was right. Jiang started looking at Jai Gang with a confused look and asked what he meant by resources. While he had his eyes closed, he explained to him that resources referred to the blood of fierce beasts, equipment, and other things. If one could be among the first, then they would also receive rewards such as mysterious fruits and secrets realms scrolls. Upon hearing this, Jiang couldn't help but be shocked and wonder if what Jai Gang was saying was true. He began to imagine the insects and thought that those resources were much better than going out to hunt fierce beasts oneself. No one knew, perhaps the insects could reproduce again at that moment. While his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, he began to stare at Jai Gang with a serious look and asked him to let him enroll in the camp, as he was not afraid of danger. He had confidence and knew that he would be able to protect himself. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him to wait as he needed to think about it. At the same time, somewhere on the west lake belonging to the Xiao family, there was a temple in the middle of the lake. Someone entered the water and using their power moved it aside, creating a large crack in the ground. This person started approaching the temple. This person was Xiao Jia Tanjiao's son named Xiao Beihan. Upon seeing how powerful he was, the others realized that he was the strongest genius in the Xiao family, and his combat power had reached a new level. As drops of the water from the lake fell like rain, Bei-han, who held a sword with one hand, turned his head back and with a serious look, asked his subordinates to stop talking nonsense, and also asked if they had found what they were looking for. 3 men wearing hoods placed their hands on their abdomen, bowed their heads before him, closed their eyes, and one of them revealed to him that he had found out that the young master Yuanwu had been pursuing a woman named Luo Sandao. He also added that she had been traveling with someone named Jiang Chen. Bei-han slightly turned his head back and with a serious look remembered that the girl from the Luo family was not from the combat class. He asked his subordinate who this guy called Jiang Chen was. The man revealed that Jiang Chen had awakened a creation class of divine rank. The last thing they knew was that he had gone to the Night Watch headquarters. One of the men placed a hand on his chest, bowed his head before him, closed his eyes and revealed that they had discovered that he and Luo Sandao had enrolled in the camp. He also added that however these 2 people were only suspects and there was still no concrete evidence. Upon hearing this, Bei-han couldn't help but smile. With a penetrating gaze, he began to look to the side and thought that they were indeed suspects in this crime. A person who had awakened a creation class of divine rank was very interesting to him. Knowing that they had enrolled in the camp, he couldn't help but feel relieved as now he wouldn't have any need to make a special trip and search for them. After 3 days, he simply decided to kill them at the camp. At the same time, at the Night Watch headquarters, Jai Gang and Jiang went to his office and sat on the sofa. Jai Gang, who had one arm resting on his knee, extended his other hand to the side, began staring intently at Jiang, and explained that even though he had already enrolled him in the Tanjiao camp, he was still very worried. He had already found a powerful ally among the people registered for him. This person was the little princess Mu Hankui from the Mu family, who had cultivation at the 7th level of transformation and was known as the Sealing Queen. Before going to camp, Jiang had to accompany her to explore a secret realm, in which he would not only be able to improve his level but also establish relationships with his companions in advance. Jiang, who was sitting in front of him with his elbows resting on the arms of the sofa, simply remained silently listening. Jai Gang approached him, took his hand, started looking at him and with a smile explained to him that he had heard that Mu Hankui was not only extremely beautiful but also the same age as him. She would be arriving soon, so he asked Jiang to use his charms to win her over. Upon hearing this, Jiang couldn't help but start sweating and become somewhat confused. He forced a smile at Jai Gang and replied that he was going to give it a try. At the same time, someone began knocking on the office door and Jai Gang gave them permission to enter. Mu Hankui and a man opened the door and began to enter inside. She rested her elbow on one hand, supported her head on the other hand, and started looking at Jiang. She told them that Jai Gang had asked her to accompany someone to a secret realm. The man put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and started smiling. She asked Jai Gang if he had changed his mind. Jai Gang told her that it was an honor for them to meet her in person. Mu Hankui crossed her arms and began to look at the ground, feeling somewhat confused. The man started touching his head and smiling. Seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Both stood up. Jai Gang rested his arm on Jiang's shoulder, put the other one on his waist, started looking at her and explained that he hadn't answered them yesterday because he was angry with her grandfather. But today he was willing to accept this but with a special condition. That condition was that she had to take Jiang Chen with her. Upon hearing this, Jiang's expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and start wondering what was happening. Mu Hankui placed her hand on her hip and as she walked towards them, she told him that she had already given him the level 30 secret realm scroll. After saying this, she asked if he still wanted to impose more conditions. Jai Gang, who had his hand resting on Jiang's shoulder, told her that everyone had their own conditions. Upon hearing this, she thought that he was looking for someone reliable to level up with since Jiang couldn't enter a secret realm lower than level 50. She came to the conclusion that they were looking for her for this reason. The man put his arms behind his back, and with a smile, he began to walk towards them in silence. She approached Jiang, started looking into his eyes, and asked him what level he was and what class he had awakened. He began to look at her and with a calm voice, he explained that he was level 17 and had awakened the creation class. Upon hearing this, she placed a hand on her waist, started pointing at Jiang with the other hand, looked at him disdainfully, and upon seeing that he was a level 17 novice of the creation class, she called him trash. Jiang couldn't help but get angry and think that she was a spoiled brat. Jai Gang exploded with rage, clenched his fist tightly, and with a hateful look, he prepared to teach her a good lesson. He called her an empty-headed brat and asked her to show more respect since Jiang had awakened a hidden divine rank. Seeing this, the other man grabbed him by the hip, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile asked him to calm down, explaining that ManhwaCapped's boyfriend had just left her and that's why she was behaving this way. She turned her head back and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but start to feel scared. She thought that this time she had gone too far. Jiang turned his head towards Jigang and upon seeing his attitude, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and confused at the same time. She became nervous, turned her body towards him, closed her eyes, extended her hands towards him, apologized to him and asked him to calm down. Jiang started touching his head with his hand and thought that this situation was strange. To the secret realm they were going to was called the Village of Light. It was level 30. And the entry requirements were that only a maximum of 5 people below level 50 could enter. The conditions to complete this secret realm were to eliminate all the monsters, kill the boss, or destroy the sacrifice altar. Several hours later, they arrived at the portal. Duanfeng, who had one hand on his waist, turned his head towards them and with a serious look asked everyone to listen carefully. This time he was going to be the leader. He asked everyone to remember that if they accidentally separated or found themselves in danger, then they should immediately return to this teleportation point. Although the probability of this secret realm becoming unstable was low, caution had to be taken. In case of any eventuality, everyone had to return here immediately and leave the secret realm. ManhwaCapped, who had her arms crossed, began looking at him with a smile as she silently listened. Chu Buling approached Jiang, reached out his hand towards the portal, closed his eyes and with a smile told him that a level 30 secret realm scroll cost at least 1 billion. Xiaoqi, who was holding onto her elbow with her other hand, also stayed silent listening. ManhwaCapped, who had her arms crossed, turned her head back and started looking at Jiang. She called him a newbie and asked him not to start crying like a baby after entering the secret realm because it would only hold them back. Jiang simply started staring at her and remained silent. Everyone entered the portal. Chu Buling turned his head back and with a smile, asked him not to worry as he would take care of protecting him. Jiang began walking towards the portal, and despite this secret realm being only level 30, he had a strange feeling. Several minutes later, everyone entered the secret realm. Its interior was a green mountain, full of trees and grass. In the middle, there was a mysterious village, surrounded by snowy mountains. Everyone approached the summit, and Chu Buling, who was at the back of the group, thought that this village was truly beautiful. He also asked why they couldn't see any monsters. Jiang simply stood silently observing the beautiful village. Duanfeng, who had his hand resting on his waist, began to look towards the village and explained to the others that it was likely that the monsters were hiding in the villagers' houses. He decided to search each one individually. Some time later, everyone descended from the mountain and arrived at the village. While they were walking, Duanfeng asked the others not to worry and assigned Chu Buling the task of attracting the enemy's attention and facing them, while he himself would take care of dealing damage. Little Qi would be in charge of healing, and Jiang Chen and ManhwaCapped would follow behind them. He asked the two not to lag behind. Upon hearing this, everyone responded with understood. Somewhere in the village there was a rock on which was written the Shining World, emitting a strong and evil aura. Duanfeng, Xiaoqi, and Jiang approached the stone. Duanfeng raised his hand to the sky, signaling them to stop. He realized that this stone was suspicious, so he asked them to be careful. Xiaoqi, who was standing beside him and holding the magical staff with both hands, explained that she disliked the atmosphere of this village a lot. She concluded that it had a dark nature. Jiang simply remained still and didn't say a single word. Xiaoqi decided to first apply a purification buff to the village. She closed her eyes, extended her hand towards the sky, and her hand began releasing blue magic. The buff she had applied started spreading throughout the entire village. Jiang brought his hand closer to his face, started looking at the magical dust, and with a surprised look thought that this buff was incredibly powerful since it not only cleared people's minds but also significantly increased their attributes and energy. At that moment, the wind started to blow and a cloud of smoke began to form. The sky changed color and turned red. The lights of the town turned on, and an evil energy began to gather in the sky. They approached and couldn't help but be shocked and alert at the same time. This evil energy came from the stone. Duanfeng quickly realized this and thought it was not good. He turned his head back and with a serious look, he ordered the others to run. Just before he could finish the sentence, the stone started absorbing him. Just before disappearing, he asked the others to stay away from the stone and also gave them the order to call for reinforcements immediately since this was a mutation. A brilliant light descended to the ground just above the town, creating a magical barrier around it to prevent them from escaping. Several system windows appeared, warning everyone that this secret realm of level 30, called the Beautiful Town, had undergone a mutation and was now called the Village of the Dead. This secret realm was nightmare level, and the conditions to complete it were either to eliminate all the undead in the Village of Light or kill the final boss. The system left them a note: the light fades away, darkness flourishes, and that's when the door to the Kingdom of Death will finally open. The smoke dispersed everyone. Jiang was teleported inside a house. As he read the system information, he realized that the secret realm had just mutated directly from normal level to nightmare level, and the others had also been scattered by the mutation. He couldn't help but be shocked, while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek. He remembered that this secret realm was level 30 and had nightmare difficulty. With his current level, fighting alone would be too dangerous. He recalled what Duanfeng had told him: if one accidentally got separated and found themselves in danger, they should immediately return to the teleportation point. Jiang decided to listen to Duanfeng and decided to return first using the teleportation stone. Without hesitating for a second, he approached the wooden wall of the house and gave it a strong kick, breaking the wooden planks. But instead of finding the way out, he found himself in a room where there were lamps hanging from the ceiling, coffins on the floor, and on the wall there was a picture of an old man. Jiang entered the room, and after looking carefully, he realized that there was no way out, only coffins. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The old man in the photo began to look at Jiang and started to smile. He started to wonder if this was an illusion. He didn't know why the old man in the photo was smiling at him. At that moment, the lid of a coffin began to open, and someone with sharp claws started to emerge. Upon hearing the sound of the coffin lid, Jiang turned his body towards the noise, and with a confused look, began to wonder what was happening. Several necromancers opened the coffins and emerged. They started staring at Jiang. According to the system, they were level 30 and had skills such as charge, decapitate, corrosion, among many others. Their main characteristic was that they were immune to normal physical attacks. The necromancers began to approach Jiang quickly and prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, he assumed an offensive stance, raised his hand, and his hand started releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. While he watched as the necromancers were getting closer little by little, with a serious look on his face, he thought that if normal physical attacks had no effect on them, it was better to use poison. Just before the necromancers could make a move, Jiang moved at an incredible speed, releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine in the process. Within seconds, it began to spread throughout the room. After doing this, he left the house, took a leap and landed on the roof of another house. In a matter of minutes, the necromancers came out of the house unharmed as if nothing had happened. He stood up, started staring at them intently, and thought that indeed poison was also considered a physical attack, which didn't have much effect on necromancers. To deal with them, he needed to rely on the help of a mage. He had to find a way to meet Xiaoqi as soon as possible. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine manifested herself. She clenched her fists and brought them close to her chest. She began to look at the necromancers with a hungry gaze, opened her mouth, and as drool was dripping from it, she asked him if she could devour them. Upon seeing that she had appeared and wanted to eat the necromancers, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a confused look, he asked her if she would be able to devour the necromancers. He also added that devouring was also considered a physical attack. The necromancers began to approach the house. While Little Nine's body was surrounded by a powerful aura, she started looking at them and explained to Jiang that she was going to be able to eat them. For her, they were delicious. Jiang started looking at the necromancers and gave her permission to go ahead and try eating them. But he also asked her not to push herself too hard. If she found herself in trouble, he would help her escape. Upon hearing this, she gathered momentum and with a murderous look began to advance towards the necromancers, thinking that they were simply food. Jiang, who was standing on the roof, started to watch her and couldn't help but think that she was impressive. Just before the necromancers could make a move, Little Nine began to move at an incredible speed, piercing through their bodies, cutting them into pieces, and devouring them in the process. She sat on the ground, pulled her knees together, placed her hands under her cheeks, closed her eyes, and with a smile, started to enjoy the meal and feel as if she were in heaven. To her, they were very delicious. Upon seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but be amazed. He began to look at her with a surprised expression and remembered that she came from the abyss, so essentially she was like an undead, both belonging to darkness. Now that he had the divine evolution, she could grow and become the mistress of the abyss, whose essence surpassed these necromancers completely. Upon remembering this, Jiang extended his hands towards the necromancers, and at that moment, his body began to emit Little Nine's poisonous mist. He started looking at her and smiled because she was capable of devouring the necromancers. He decided it was time for the other insects to also come out and enjoy a good meal. Jiang's body began to emit a powerful energy, releasing the swarm of insects. He gave them all the order to separate and also asked them to be careful not to be discovered by his companions. In the blink of an eye, thousands of insects emerged from his body and started attacking the necromancers. The insects began to attack and devour the necromancers. A system window appeared to inform him that his spiritual pets had killed 3 low-level necromancers, granting him 15,021 points. Little Nine also started devouring them, obtaining 4,602 points. As the insects were slowly devouring the necromancers, another system window appeared and congratulated Jiang for leveling up. He went from level 17 to level 18, gaining 1 point in each attribute and 10 potential points. Jiang entered the house again, extended one hand to the side, clenched his other fist, started looking at it and couldn't help but smile when he saw that this was too fast. In just a few seconds, he had obtained over 500,000 experience points and leveled up. He thought that this secret realm was simply a paradise tailored for him. Now that there were no necromancers in the house anymore, he turned his head back and decided to investigate the old man's strange photograph. Before, the old man was smiling, but now he was terrified and trembling with fear. Jiang approached the photo, put his hands on his waist, started looking at it and with a smile asked the old man why he wasn't smiling. Little Nine manifested herself. She started looking at the photo and informed Jiang that everything outside had been eaten. He began to point at the photo with his thumb, and with a smile he praised Little Nine for having done a good job. He asked her to look at the photo and also if she could devour it. Upon hearing this, she started looking at the photo with a hungry gaze. Seeing this, the old man became even more afraid and couldn't help but start trembling. At that moment, the old man's photo exploded into pieces, leaving them in shock. They couldn't help but wonder what was happening. A system window appeared. They had successfully scared off the level 35 elite Death Guardian. As a reward, the system granted them 8701 experience points. The pieces of the photo fell to the ground. Jiang and Little Nine started looking at the pieces and felt a little depressed. At the same time, somewhere else in the village, someone hit a necromancer in the face with a bow. This person was none other than Duan Feng. Several necromancers surrounded him, but he drew his bow, held it with both hands, clenched his teeth tightly and with a determined look began to swing it forcefully, hitting one of the necromancers in the process. Another necromancer tried to attack him by surprise, but he reacted in time and using the sharp string of the bow, he cut its hand. He couldn't help but feel fortunate since he had a longbow as a weapon. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to deal with these undead creatures. He began to worry about the others, especially Jiang Chen, who was not even level 30. If something really bad were to happen, he didn't know how he would explain it to his boss. While he was lost in his thoughts, a system window appeared in the sky to inform him that his teammate had killed a lower level Spectre and an elite rank Guardian of level 35. As a reward, he obtained 12,161 points. Duan Feng lifted his head, started looking at the system window and couldn't help but be shocked. He began to tremble and started questioning what was happening and who was doing this. A horde of necromancers appeared and started chasing him. He grabbed the bow with one hand and began to flee. He clenched his teeth tightly and with a serious look, he remembered that this was a secret realm that had mutated. He didn't know who was killing so many monsters in seconds. He came to the conclusion that the responsible person could not be someone weak. At first, he thought it could be Chu Bula, but then dismissed him since his physical attributes were very passive. Then he thought it could be Xiaoqi, but dismissed her as well since she was a mage who could restrain necromancers but wouldn't be able to kill them in seconds. He immediately ruled out Jiang since he was low level. He had awakened the poison and growth class of all things, which would have no effect against the undead. With a surprised look, he began to look ahead and started questioning if the person who was killing the monsters was Mu Hangui. He didn't know if she was that strong. The necromancers slowly started closing in on him. Seeing this, he began to run even faster. Now that there was someone on the team who could defeat the monsters instantly, he thought there was time to save the others. He asked Jiang to hold on a little longer. At the same time, in some other place in the village, someone put their hand on the wound they had on their shoulder. This person was very injured. She was none other than Mu Hangui. Behind her there was a horde of necromancers who were chasing her. She was very injured, with scratches all over her body. While she was holding the wound on her arm with her hand, she opened her mouth and started bleeding. She was very desperate because she didn't want to die. She was the only one who had a hidden profession in her family. She still had to participate in the Young Talents camp and revitalize her family. Her hopes for life slowly began to fade away. Soon, she would run out of energy. She couldn't even use her primary ability called speed properly. She started crying because she wanted to go home and didn't want to die. At that moment, she saw several necromancers running away, and upon seeing this, she began to question whether it was her teammate who had just killed the undead. She started walking even faster, and several seconds later, she reached the end of the alley. At that moment, Little Nine's poisonous mist began to appear from around the corner. Upon seeing this powerful energy, she couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and feel relieved. Thinking that she was saved, she just had to hold on a little longer. But for her bad luck, her strength completely ran out, causing her to fall to the ground. While she had both arms supported on the floor, she closed her eyes, and as blood was dripping from her mouth, she thought this wasn't good. The necromancers began to approach her and prepared to attack. Seeing this, she panicked, extended her hand forward, and with a desperate look started asking for help. At that moment, Jiang appeared, and with a serious look, he began to stare at her. Upon seeing that the person from whom the necromancers were fleeing was Jiang, she couldn't help but be shocked. She started reaching out her hand towards him, and with a surprised look, she couldn't help but wonder what was happening and how it was possible for him to be so strong. The necromancers began to approach her and prepared to finish her off. With her last bit of strength, she reached out her hand towards Jiang and asked him to save her. Jiang turned his head towards her, and with a serious look, he started to gaze at her and remained silent in deep thought. Several necromancers grabbed Mu Hanqui's arm, but at that moment, Jiang also grabbed her arm and asked her to flee. She began to look at his arm with a confused expression and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Using all his strength, Jiang pushed Mu Hanqui aside and threw her backwards, saving her from the necromancer's attack. While he had one hand extended backwards, he stared intently at the necromancers and asked her to get away from here and stop interfering. She started running backwards, and then suddenly she tripped and fell to the ground. Several seconds later, while she had one hand on the ground, she began to sit up, started wiping her face with the other hand. And while one eye was closed, she began to look at him with the other and thought that Jiang Chen was crazy. A purple energy appeared, and upon seeing this, her expression changed drastically. She couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering what was happening. Jiang extended his hand towards the necromancers, releasing a swarm of insects that quickly advanced towards them and began attacking, tearing their bodies into pieces. Mu Hanqui, who was behind Jiang, couldn't help but think that he was very handsome. In an instant, the insects killed and completely devoured the necromancers. While Jiang's body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. Mu Hanqui placed both hands on the ground, sat down, started looking at Jiang, and couldn't help but wonder if he really was a useless person from the creation class. Jai Gang had told her that he had 2 classes, and she quickly realized that this was his true power. She put her hand over her mouth, started blushing, and looked at Jiang with a loving gaze. Her heart was beating very fast, which meant she was in love. 30 minutes later, the others finally got rid of the necromancers and gathered somewhere in the village. Chu Buling placed both hands on his knees, started breathing heavily, and couldn't help but think that necromancers were very powerful. Duanfeng began touching his head with his hand and with a confused look thought that this was very strange since he hadn't come across another necromancer since he had left that house. Xiaoqi, who was holding the magical staff with both hands, turned her head towards them and asked Duanfeng if it could be possible that Mu Hanqui had the ability to control necromancers. They also didn't know if she had awakened any hidden class, which was very strange for her too. She started pointing to one side with her finger and, with a surprised look, drew the attention of the others and informed them that there were traces of a fight, which meant that the battle had ended recently. Chu Buling began to look in the direction she was pointing and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Duanfeng also started looking, but he was more concerned about Jiang as he didn't know if he was okay. Not far from them were some remains of the necromancers, covered by Little Nine's poisonous mist. They approached the area, and Xiaoqi, who was holding the magical staff with one hand, stood there speechless upon seeing that these were indeed remnants of the necromancers. Duanfeng couldn't help but panic. He asked the others to quickly search for Jiang, as if something were to happen to him, none of them would be able to take the responsibility. After this, the 3 dispersed throughout the village and began searching for Jiang. Several minutes later, they started following the traces and turned a corner. Upon seeing what was in front of them, they couldn't help but be shocked. Duanfeng was in shock. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Xiaoqi was somewhat surprised and began to wonder what was happening. In front of them there was a street with small stairs, and on these stairs sat Jiang, who had both elbows resting on his knees and his head supported on his hand. Beside him was Mu Hanqui. She clenched her fists tightly, sat behind him, and started massaging his back. Near them, on the ground, there were more remains of necromancers. Chu Byulong, who was behind them, asked Duanfeng if that was Jiang. Xiao Qi began pointing to the sky with her finger and, with a surprised look, told him that it was indeed Jiang. Duanfeng started looking at Jiang with a confused expression and asked the others not to move because this was too strange. He didn't understand how the granddaughter of a king could be giving back massages to Jiang Chen as if she were a servant. He came to the conclusion that these two were probably illusions created by the boss of this secret realm. Mu Hongqi clenched her fists, stood behind Jiang, and started giving him a massage. Both of them looked ahead and saw Duanfeng and the others. Upon seeing that they had arrived, Jiang stood up, pointed to one side with his thumb, and explained to them that the boss was in the backyard of the village. Far from feeling relieved, they adopted an offensive stance. Duanfeng took out his bow and with a serious look ordered them not to move. Chu Byulong clenched both fists and prepared to attack. Xiao Qi tightly held the magical staff, stared at Jiang, and asked him to answer the question they were going to ask first. Upon hearing this, Jiang and Mu Hongqi couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. She stood up, positioned herself in front of him, extended her hands to the sides, looked at them with a serious gaze, and told them that if they wanted to harm Jiang, then they would have to step over her dead body first. He began to look at her with a confused look and couldn't help but wonder what she was doing and why she was behaving this way. Jiang put his hand on her face, pushed her aside, stood in front of her, closed his eyes, placed the other hand on his chest, and with a smile explained to Duanfeng that he knew what they were thinking. He revealed to everyone that he wasn't any monster, he just had a little more charm. They didn't respond, and upon seeing this, he told them that their boss was named Jai Gang and Aunt Tang cooked very well. Xiao Qi approached him, placed both hands on his chest, and asked if he was injured. He started touching his head with his hand, closed his eyes, and began to smile. Chu Byulong couldn't help but feel relieved to see that he really was Jiang and wasn't hurt. On the other hand, Duanfeng remained somewhat confused. Mu Hongqi, who was hiding behind Jiang, grabbed his cloak with one hand and, while blushing like a tomato, asked the others not to be angry with her because she was just being obedient. Jiang turned his head towards her and with an angry look asked her to tell the truth and stop lying. Upon hearing this, Xiao Qi was somewhat surprised as she did not expect this from him. Duanfeng began to smile and thought that he really had the skills to conquer women. Chu Byulong also started to smile and thought that he was hopeless. Jiang began to feel overwhelmed and with a shout, told them that it was enough already. He also asked if they didn't want to defeat the boss. In response, the others started to smile and changed the subject by saying yes. Some time later, they arrived at the backyard of the village. With a determined look, Jiang gave a strong kick to the door while the others simply remained silent. They opened the door and started entering the backyard. In front of them stood the boss of this secret realm, who was giant and had a murderous gaze. It slightly lowered its head and began staring fixedly at Jiang. A system window appeared and informed everyone that this boss was called the God of the Undead, had a boss rank, and was level 40. Jiang raised his head and began to stare at the boss, silently contemplating. Everyone started looking at the boss and couldn't help but be shocked. With a serious and determined look, Duanfeng revealed to them that this was the level 40 boss. He also asked them to be careful as he would attract its attention first. He assigned Mu Hongqi with the task of protecting Jiang. He also asked Xiao Qi not to forget to use the buff and advised her to be careful with the boss's attacks. They couldn't be reckless, they had to try to ensure their own safety while attacking. They had to be very careful because this was no game. The boss simply started looking at them and remained silent, and several seconds later, it began to move. Seeing this, Duanfeng asked the others to be careful as it was moving, and also ordered them to separate. But to everyone's surprise, instead of attacking, the boss crouched down, rested its elbow on the ground, and prostrated itself before them, leaving everyone in shock. The boss's body began to tremble. Duanfeng was dumbfounded and with a surprised look he started wondering what was happening. Chu Byulong was also astonished. He was surprised because he didn't know why the boss was begging for forgiveness. Jiang took a step forward, extended his hand towards the boss, and his body began to emit Little Nine's poisonous mist. They were all injured, so he decided to take care of the boss. He knew this was a good opportunity, so he called Little Nine and told her it was time to eat. In the blink of an eye, Little Nine manifested in the form of the insect mother. She opened her mouth and prepared to devour the boss. It lifted its head, looked to one side, and upon seeing this, it couldn't help but be shocked. Little Nine began to devour the boss while Jiang simply remained silent and started smiling. Several system windows appeared. He had killed the boss called God of the Undead, and as a reward, the system granted him 76,690 experience points. Little Nine also transferred her 31,224 experience points to him. Thanks to the experience points, he went from level 25 to level 26. Each of his attribute points improved, and he also obtained 10 potential points. In the blink of an eye, she completely devoured the boss, and her poisonous mist began to return to Jiang's body. Another system window appeared and congratulated everyone for defeating the boss and completing the secret realm called Village of the Undead. The system started calculating the reward. Seeing that Jiang had defeated the boss, Duanfeng and the others quickly realized that he had also instantly killed all the necromancers in the village. Jiang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile, he explained to them that it had been a coincidence that his poison could eliminate the necromancers. The system finished calculating the rewards and a mission status window appeared. Duanfeng, who was level 49, received a C rank evaluation. Chu Bulan, also level 49, received a D rank evaluation. Xiaoqi, who was level 46, received a D rank evaluation. Mu Honghui, who was level 36, received an E rank evaluation. And finally Jiang, who was level 26, received a triple S rank evaluation. A medal appeared in the sky, and upon seeing it, everyone was surprised. They had successfully cleared the secret realm called Village of the Undead, which was level 30 and had a nightmare difficulty. The system evaluation was triple S rank. As a reward, the system granted them the Dead Soul Medal, a special item that could be equipped and withstand one deadly attack. It was an item already bound to them and couldn't be transferred or sold. Duanfeng couldn't help but be amazed as the individual reward items were already quite good, and now they had also obtained a very advanced item. They had never before received rewards like these, all thanks to following Jiang. They had won without doing anything. They approached Jiang, put their hands on their knees, bowed their heads to him, and thanked him. He put his hand behind his head and started laughing. Jiang, who had been the best, obtained many rewards. Among them were 2 books, a metal glove, a scroll, a crystal, a scythe, a necklace, a ring, and a shield. He crossed his arms, and while looking at the items, he thought it was no wonder that this was a level 30 secret realm. The death rate was too high. He quickly came to the conclusion that these items must be worth billions. Among the items, there was one item that caught his attention quite strongly. This item was called Invisibility Cape. It was of platinum quality and could grant 80 agility points and 50 energy points to the user. By using this cape, one could become invisible for 3 minutes with a cooldown time of 2 hours. Jiang extended his hand towards the invisibility cape, and with a surprised look, he decided to keep it. For him, this cape was practical, useful, and fashionable. The other items were not going to be of much use to him, so he decided to sell them when he returned and buy pure blood for the insects. A portal appeared in the sky, along with a system window. Due to the mutation in the secret realm and having completed the challenge, this secret realm was about to disappear, so the system asked everyone to leave as soon as possible. This time the devour value had increased a lot, so if the insects drank a little more blood, they would be able to reproduce for a second time. Night fell, and they went back to the Night's Watch headquarters. They informed Jai Gang that the secret realm had mutated. Jiang had conquered Mu Honghui, and he was also the one who had cleaned up the secret realm. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang couldn't help but be shocked. He asked everyone to leave the office as he wanted to speak alone with Jiang. Duanfeng, who was standing behind Jiang, responded with a understood. Several minutes later, when everyone left, Jiang entered the office. Jai Gang turned his body towards him and with a serious look asked him to confess and be honest, as this way he would be treated leniently. But if he resisted, then he would be severely punished. Jiang became somewhat confused, and with a trembling voice, he asked him what he meant by being honest. Jai Gang started staring into Jiang's eyes. He had told the others that the Venom class could counteract necromancers, but Jai Gang knew this was just an excuse to deceive Duanfeng and the others. He knew that Jiang was pulling his leg. While Jai Gang's eyes were shining, with a sinister look he asked Jiang to tell the truth and also asked him what he was hiding. He began to look at him with a confused gaze and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. He started sweating, and Little Nine manifested in his consciousness. She was also terrified. He didn't know if the insects were about to be discovered. They were an ancient celestial plague, and if people found out about their existence, he didn't know if they would forgive him. Jai Gang approached him, and with a sinister look asked him to speak. Seeing his expression, Jiang couldn't help but feel afraid and began to tremble. With a trembling voice, he tried to explain to him what had happened. Seeing that Jiang was very scared, Jai Gang calmed down and started to smile. He approached him, and while he had one hand on his hip, he placed the other on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and began laughing out loud. Upon seeing that, he also became nervous. He didn't know where his courage had gone when he had killed the monsters in the secret realm. Jiang started sweating like crazy. He began to look at Jai Gang, and it didn't take long for him to realize that he was pulling his leg. He sat on the sofa, and while he had one arm resting on it, he extended the other hand towards the ceiling, and with a calm look explained that he wasn't pulling his leg. It was just that if he didn't want to talk now, then he also didn't want to keep pressuring him. The more cards up his sleeve Jiang had, the happier Jai Gang would be. In the future, Night Watch would count on him to achieve new successes. Jiang finally calmed down a bit, put his hand on his chest, and with a sincere smile asked him not to worry. He decided not to reveal anything for now, but in return he was going to get him epic level equipment. Uncle Jai Gang closed his eyes and couldn't help but start laughing. He appreciated Jiang's intention, but an epic level piece of equipment wasn't easy to obtain. In response, Jiang explained that he was serious. Jai Gang decided that it was time to get serious. He reached out towards the ceiling, causing a magic circle to start appearing. With a serious look, he thought it was good that Jiang had an ace up his sleeve, but there were some things he needed to clarify. From within the magic circle emerged 3 bandaged corpses, and they fell to the ground in front of Jiang. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. He asked Uncle Jai Gang what this was and where these corpses had come from. Jai Gang started to stare at Jiang and revealed to him that these guys were at least 3rd grade masters of level 60 or higher. There were even 2 4th grade grand masters with a level above 90. They were not people to be taken lightly, since any one of them was someone whom even Jai Gang could not handle. He was just a corpse collector. Jiang became somewhat nervous, and as a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he began to look at the corpses and with a terrified look asked Jai Gang if all these guys wanted to kill him. With a calm look, Jai Gang asked him to stop talking nonsense, as these guys had gone to kill Muhankyu, but they had all been secretly eliminated by her protectors. Jiang turned towards him and with a confused look asked why these guys wanted to murder Muhankyu. In response, he took out a scroll, and while holding it in his hand, asked him to read the content. Jiang took the scroll with both hands, opened it and began to read. This scroll was a great summer hunting classification. The first on the list was someone of level 46 named Yingjian, an invincible descendant, who was in the war zone of the capital. Killing him would grant 3 celestial rewards. The second on the list was someone of level 46 named Jai Xuanyu, an invincible descendant, who was in the Madu war zone called Shanghai. Killing him would grant 3 celestial rewards. The third on the list was someone of level 45 named Jiang Wushuang, an invincible descendant. He was in the war zone south of the Yangtze River called Jiangnan. Killing him would grant 3 celestial rewards. The 12th on the list was someone of level 41 named Xiao Beihan, a national defender descendant. He was in the war zone south of the Yangtze River called Jiangnan. Killing him would grant 2 celestial rewards. Jiang did not know what this great summer hunting list was. All were names he had not heard before. Looking a little more closely, he noticed the name Xiao Beihan. With a surprised look, he asked Jai Gang if this was not a member of the Xiao family that protected the country. He began to look at Jiang with a serious expression and responded that yes, all of them were the most outstanding geniuses of his generation's camp, and Xiao Beihan was one of them. He was also going to participate in the Tanjiao camp of the 8 war zones, and Xiao Beihan was going to be with Jiang in the Yangtze River Southern War Zone. With a serious look, Jai Gang explained to him that if one was in the 7th transformation, they were considered as King Protector. If one was in the 8th transformation, they were considered as Country Protector, and if one was in the 9th transformation, they were considered invincible. The top 100 prodigies of Great Xia were at least descendants of sealed kings. Muhankyu, being one of the 12 descendants of sealed kings in Jiangnan, had only been able to occupy position 77. On the scroll, there was also information about her. She was ranked number 77, a descendant of the sealed king, and she was in the Jiangnan war zone. Killing her would grant a celestial level reward. Jai Gang began to look at Jiang and explained that if the descendants were powerful, then much more so would be the Xiao family that ruled the country. Several minutes later, Jiang finished reading the entire scroll, approached Jai Gang and returned it to him. With a serious look, he asked if he had shown this to him so that he wouldn't be too unprepared in the Tanjiao camp. He took the scroll with his hand and replied yes, the greater the power he displayed, the more dangers he would expose himself to. He asked Jiang not to expose himself recklessly unless absolutely necessary. He clenched his fist tightly, started looking at the ground with a lost gaze, and explained that the other geniuses had the backing of great powers, but his uncle, Jai Gang, although he had a good master, had not learned the arts well and so far was only a third-level master. He feared he might not be able to protect Zhang adequately. He began to walk and told Jai Gang that he would take this into account and would try not to reveal his power to anyone in the Tanjiao camp. He started looking at the ground again and thought that Uncle Jai Gang not only did not blame him for hiding his power, but was also making great efforts to protect him. He put his hand under his chin, and with a smile, he remembered that they said Jiang's performance in the secret realm had been better than the others. If this got out, then he would definitely be above Mu Hankyu in the rankings. But there was something strange. She hadn't said a single word to anyone since she returned and was keeping his secret. He stood up, and while keeping his hand under his chin, approached Jiang. He started looking into his eyes with an insinuating look, and with a smile asked him to be honest. He asked what he had done to Mu Hankyu. He recalled that in the secret realm there were only necromancers. He thought Jiang's tastes were really strange. Upon hearing this, Jiang began to look at Jai Gang with a confused expression and couldn't help but start sweating. To stop talking about the subject, he quickly turned his back on him, and as he was walking away, he started waving goodbye with his hand and explained that he was going to take a shower and then sleep because he wanted to rest a bit. With a confused look, Jai Gang told him that he had not said this was a bad thing. Several hours later, it began to get dark, and Jiang returned to his apartment. In front of him was a table with a bunch of jars. He placed both hands on the table and with a joyful look started to gaze at the jars. He had bought 33 units of 3rd level blood and 14 units of 4th level blood. He had sold most of the equipment to get this. This should be enough for the insects to reproduce in the 2nd generation. He took a jar, removed the lid, began to pour the purple blood on his arm, and with a smile asked the little insects to come out as it was time to eat. He decided to start first with the refined 3rd level blood. This was equivalent to devouring a master of 3 human transformations with a level above 60. To extract just one jar required hundreds of ferocious beasts. He told the insects that their father had made a great effort for this. Little Nine didn't take long to smell the scent of blood. She manifested herself, climbed onto Jiang's head, started looking at his arm with a hungry gaze and explained to him that she also wanted to eat. While the blood was floating around his arm, he began to look at Little Nine with a cheerful look and asked her not to eat now, as it was still a long way before she could reproduce. Upon hearing this, she became sad, grabbed Jiang's hair with both hands, closed her eyes and started crying like a little girl. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. He grabbed her with his hand, lowered her from his head and threw her on the table on top of a jar. He closed his eyes, and although at first he didn't want to, in the end he also let her eat. She grabbed the lid off the jar and with a hungry look, thanked him saying that he was the best. She removed the lid from the jar, put a straw inside it, and started drinking. She was level 18 and was in the process of leveling up to 19. While she was drinking, Jiang grabbed another jar of blood, removed the cap, and began pouring the blood into his arm again. This was level 4 blood, equivalent to a great human master of level 90 or higher. Upon smelling the blood, the insects emerged from his body and began to drink the blood. A system window appeared and informed him that the reproduction process of 9 miasma wings insect larvae had begun. Each insect could reproduce a total of between 40 and 60 larvae. The divine evolutionary acceleration was in progress. More insects came out of his body and started to drink the blood. And several minutes later another system window appeared to inform him that the insect reproduction process had been completed. Now there was a total of 100,000 offspring. At that moment, Jiang's hand began to release Little Nine's poisonous mist, which was made of insects. He started looking at his hand, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. With a surprised look, he went on alert and began to wonder what was happening. Several seconds later, the insect larvae began to emerge through his hand. He grabbed his hand to prevent the insects from coming out, but it was in vain. The 100,000 insect larvae emerged and started flying around his apartment, devouring everything in their path. Jiang began to look at the ceiling, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic and thought that the insects were rebelling. He clenched his fist tightly, extended it towards the ceiling, gritted his teeth forcefully and gave the order to all the insects to return to the insect nest and stay still, as he had not asked them to come out. The insects began entering his arm and started returning to the insect nest. When looking to one side, he saw that the insects had begun devouring everything. They had devoured the painting and part of the table. He did not take long to realize that the insects were terrifying and it was dangerous to let them out while at home since they were capable of destroying it. On the table lay little Nine. She was licking a jar of blood and enjoying every drop. With an angry look, Jiang scolded her for thinking only about eating instead of taking care of her mischievous offspring. He turned his head to the side and his statistics window appeared. Currently, he was level 26, had the identity of Sovereign of Insects, had the profession of Divine Rank Creation, and his talents were Growth of All Things level 1, Divine Evolution level 1, and Ancestral Tree. Little Nine's statistics window also appeared. She was a level 21 insect mother, or also known as 9 Wings of Miasma. She was disaster level. She had an offspring count of 100,000 units and her combat power evaluation was 197 stars. Upon seeing that she had a combat power of 197 stars, Jiang couldn't help but feel joyful and start to smile. This had improved too quickly. She was almost at the level of a 3rd level master. While his body was surrounded by powerful energy, he clenched his fist tightly and thought that everything was ready. Now it only remained to wait and go to the Tanjiao camp tomorrow, reach level 30 all at once, and complete Little Nine's second reproduction. Jiang started to imagine the sexy Little Nine, and with a joyful look he thought that at that moment, he was going to be able to obtain a new mother insect. At the same time, Jane Tang returned to the headquarters of the Night's Watch. With a surprised look, she asked Jai Gang if he wanted her to seek out Tiandao Wang for him to intervene. She didn't know if it was necessary to make such a fuss over Jiang Chen's matter. Jai Gang was sitting in front of her on the sofa, while he had one hand resting on the arm of the sofa. He put the other under his chin, and explained to her that he was doing this just in case. He knew that in the war zone south of the river, Jiang would meet with the prodigy of the Xiao family, Xiao Beihan. The most dangerous thing was that there were no secrets that could be hidden in Tanjiao camp. He started looking at the floor and with a sincere look explained to her that there was something in Jiang that terrified him. He was worried about Jiang's poison. He knew he was hiding many secrets from them. With a serious look, she began to stare at Jai Gang. She couldn't believe that this was possible and also asked him not to scare her. She began to remember what had happened a long time ago. 600 years ago, the Devourer caused disturbances and Great Zia created the Forbidden Professions. Once discovered, users of Forbidden Professions were eliminated directly. She stood up, and with a look full of terror, she explained to him that if Jiang Chen really had a Forbidden Profession, then it would be revealed at the moment of awakening. She believed that Jai Gang was just being paranoid. Jai Gang clasped his hand with the other hand, started looking at the ground with a look full of terror, and thought that he hoped it was as she was saying, that only he was being paranoid. The next day, Jiang left his apartment and went to a forest. Then he took out a map, held it with both hands, and while looking at it, began to question which way was the right one. He wasn't sure if he had gotten lost again. At that moment, someone shouted loudly for help. Jiang, who was trying to find the way, started looking back and with a confused look began to wonder who was shouting. Behind him there was a giant tree. On the ground beside it there was a sword. At the top of the tree, there was a man with white hair holding onto a branch. He was asking for help because he was afraid of heights. Jiang turned around, started looking up, and upon seeing the man, he remained silently thinking. He decided to help him. He extended his hand towards him and used the ability called Growth of All Things, Vine. By doing this, several branches emerged from the ground and began to advance towards the man. Just before he let go of the trunk and fell from the tree, the branches wrapped around his body, preventing him from falling. Several seconds later, the man finally landed on the ground. He placed both hands and both knees on the ground, and while panting heavily he explained to Jiang that he had been quite scared. He just wanted to save a bird's nest. He had thought that nest didn't seem high up, but upon climbing realized it was really very high. Jiang approached him, started looking at him, and while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, remained somewhat confused seeing that the man was afraid of heights yet still decided to climb the tree to save a bird's nest. He didn't know if this man was an idiot. The man stood up. He was an older man. He extended his hand towards Jiang and with a pleasant look thanked him for saving him and also asked what he wanted in return. Jiang, who was lost, asked the man if he knew how to get to the Tanjiao camp. The man turned his back on Jiang, and as he was walking away from him, closed his eyes and with a smile began to ask him to follow since he too was going to the Tanjiao camp because he had a task there. He put his hand behind his head, thanked him, and decided to follow him. Jiang started to follow the man, extended his hand towards him and decided to ask a bit about him. He asked him if he was also a job changer. He was somewhat confused since the man carried his sword behind his back instead of storing it in the system inventory. He started walking in front of Jiang and explained that he actually wasn't a job changer but just an enthusiast who liked practicing with the sword. He turned his head towards Jiang, started looking him in the eyes and with a cheerful smile, explained that when he was young, he didn't have the talent, and after failing to change job, he fought and struggled for almost 10 years and still wasn't even able to afford buying a bathroom in the city. At that moment he was completely desperate and ran to the mountains, found a small abandoned cabin, climbed on top of a table and prepared to hang himself. But when he looked to one side he saw a sword. Seeing this sword, the will to continue living returned in him. Since then, he began practicing with the sword every day on the mountain. Practiced drawing the sword for 20 years and fencing for 30 years, and then suddenly he had a revelation. He asked Jiang if it didn't seem incredible. Jiang, who was somewhat confused, responded that it was certainly something incredible. The man grabbed the sword with his hand, started looking at the ground, and asked Jiang if he wanted to learn how to handle the sword. He knew a special move. Just before he could say the name of the special move, Jiang interrupted him and refused. Upon hearing this, he put away the sword, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile thought that Jiang was a bit impatient. He decided to wait for the moment when Jiang would want to learn how to handle the sword. Jiang started looking at the sky, and upon seeing what had appeared, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a cheerful look, he asked the man to look and also asked him if that wasn't the Tanjiao camp. But to everyone's surprise, the man disappeared. Jiang started looking around and noticing that the man was not there. He became somewhat confused and began to wonder where the man was. He also thought that this old man was too strange. At the same time in Tanjiao camp, several helicopters started flying in the sky. At the entrance, there was a receptionist, and in front of the desk there was a huge line of people. He asked all geniuses who were going to enter the camp to first come and line up for registration. Each one would receive an identification bracelet which could not be removed unless one was eliminated. A man with black hair began to approach the entrance. A while later, it was Jiang's turn from Chu City. He received the identification bracelet and started putting it on his wrist. In this camp, Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao were also present. They brought their hands to their chests, started looking at Jiang with a loving gaze, and couldn't help but start blushing upon seeing that he had also come to the camp. For Mu Hankyu, he was her master, and for Luo Sandao, he was her benefactor. Jiang couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. Being a benefactor was fine for him, but being her master wasn't. They too started to fight among themselves. With an aggressive look they began to insult each other. Luo Sandao did not know why Mu Hankyu was calling Jiang love. She had advised her many times to read fewer romance novels so that she would not fantasize senselessly like men. Mu Hankyu responded that she was right. Now she really knew what true love was. According to her, Luo Sandao was nothing. While the two of them were fighting, Little Nine manifested herself. She took out a piece of watermelon, closed her eyes, and while she was eating it, explained to Jiang that she was enjoying watching the two of them fight. Jiang remained silent as this information was overwhelming for him. Lu Sandao began pointing at her with her finger and asked why she was so close to Jiang without any reason. Mu Hankyu approached him, grabbed his arm, started mocking Lu Sandao, and asked her to stop being so narcissistic since she wasn't following him. According to her, Jiang had the final say. Jiang did not say a single word. Upon seeing this, Lu Sandao began to point at her with her finger and with a mocking smile told her that she had said this a long time ago, and now it had come true. Mu Hankyu started touching the tips of her fingers. She began to look at the ground and explained to her that Jiang was very handsome. Luo Sandao approached her, put a hand on her shoulder, closed her eyes, and while laughing asked her if they were good friends again now. Mu Hankyu started to look at her and explained that she felt they were now both better friends and rivals in love. They could only be considered friend-enemies. Seeing this, Jiang began to sweat and thought that girls were very strange. At that moment, a loud bang was heard not far from them. Everyone started looking towards the direction of the bang and saw a curtain of smoke. As the curtain of smoke was disappearing, Jiang began to wonder what was happening. Luo Sandao started to look a little more closely and realized that someone was fighting. The same man we saw at the entrance of the camp appeared. He started rolling up his sleeves, clenched his teeth tightly, and with an aggressive look, began to ask who was fighting. Not everyone had entered the camp yet and someone was already fighting. He didn't know if this person was looking for death. Jiang, who was behind him, started staring at him intently and realized that he was the patrol instructor. He didn't know if the instructors had third-level strength. The instructor approached the place of the fight, but someone gave him a strong punch in the stomach, causing his body to be thrown backward. Seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but stay in shock. The instructor's body was thrown backward and fell to the ground. He put his hand on his chest, opened his mouth, and while bleeding, gave the order to the others to notify the superiors, as this was getting out of hand. Luo Sandao was left speechless upon seeing that a third-level master had been thrown into the air in a second. With a surprised look, she began to wonder who had hit the instructor. With a serious look, Mu Hankyu revealed to her that they were the standouts from Jiangnan's war zone. A woman with red eyes, who was wearing assassin clothes, appeared. She put her hand on her hip, started staring at the instructor and remained silent. Her name was Tang Ying. She was an assassin. Her strength was extremely terrifying. She was the youngest assassin of Tianjilu. It was said that recently she had assassinated a great level 4 master in Sakura country. Another man who had red hair appeared, his body surrounded by powerful energy. He began to look at him and couldn't help but start smiling. His name was Bai Feng, and he was known as the Little God of Death. He was a disciple of the chief commander of the East Sea Defense Line. He was the brightest and most promising seed in the military district but had psychological problems. He tended to lose control easily and turn into a demon. Another blue-haired man appeared. He extended the sword into the sky, began to stare at Jiang and started to smile. His name was Xiao Beihan. His grandfather was one of the 7 guardians of Great Xia. He had the profession of Blue Lotus Immortal Swordsman, comparable to a divine-level profession. Luo Sandao began to look at Xiao Beihan with a terrified gaze and told Jiang that she knew this damn dog. The epic sword he had in his hand had been stolen from her house. Jiang began to look at him with a calm gaze, and upon seeing that he was Xiao Beihan, there was no longer any doubt in him that he was a prodigy, since his strength far surpassed that of Xiao Yuanwu. The people did not know who was being attacked by the 3 together. In the middle of them there was a shirtless man with orange hair. He stood up, adopted an offensive stance and prepared to attack. While the smoke curtain was disappearing, he clenched his fist tightly and decided it was time to counterattack. With a murderous look, he clenched his fist tightly, and using all his strength, gave a strong punch to the ground, breaking it into pieces. He was an invincible descendant. His name was Jiang Wu Shuang. It was said that he had 3 professions and all were unique and hidden. He was strangely strong, since the 3 together could not defeat him. Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao started to look at Wu Shuang with a surprised gaze. Even Jiang himself was shocked, as Wu Shuang was 3rd on the summer ranking list. He didn't know if his little insects would be able to face this guy. At that moment, Xiao Beihan gathered momentum, jumped up, grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to attack. Jiang looked up and seeing this, thought it wasn't good. Xiao Beihan landed on the ground, gripping the sword forcefully, causing the ground to start cracking. He was very close to Luo Sandao, but luckily Jiang grabbed her by the hip, jumped and dodged his attack. Xiao Beihan started staring at Wushwang with a serious look and praised him, since his wind fist was very powerful. Jiang started looking at Xiao Beihan and caught his attention. Xiao Beihan began to sheath the sword, and upon seeing Jiang he was somewhat surprised. He had heard that he had been the one who killed Xiao Yuanwu. He drew his sword again, started pointing the tip towards Jiang, and while his body was surrounded by a powerful aura, he began to stare intently at Jiang. Despite also despising the useless Xiao Yuanwu, today Jiang was going to die. Originally he had planned to deal with Wushwang first and then take care of an ant like Jiang. But since he was here, he decided to start with him. Jiang did not let himself be intimidated. He extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. With a look full of determination, he told him that although their strength was different, the Xiao family was really just as rotten at its core. Xiao Beihan extended his sword to one side and began approaching Jiang. Seeing this, Jiang extended both hands to the sides and prepared to attack. Although he had promised Uncle Jai Gang not to show his power, now there was nothing else that could be done in this situation. Luo Sandao, who was behind them, simply remained silent. Just before the combat could begin, someone launched a powerful slash towards them, which split the ground in 2. This person ordered everyone to step aside as the Grand Instructor known as the King of the Celestial Sword had arrived. Seeing this, both Jiang and Xiao Beihan deactivated their powers. He began to look in the direction of the attack and couldn't help but start wondering who the King of the Celestial Sword was. This instructor was the same person that Jiang had saved from the tree. He extended the sword towards them and with a serious look, explained that if anyone dared to cause trouble before the camp started, they would have to face his sword. Jiang began to look at the instructor and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. He couldn't believe that the strange old man he had encountered on the road was the chief called King of the Celestial Sword. With just one movement of his sword energy, he had made the 4 great geniuses tremble until they were immobile. He didn't know if his small insects had also been destroyed by his sword's shockwave. After launching the attack, the old man grabbed the sword's hilt with one hand, began to sheath it and started staring intently at Jiang and Xiao Beihan. One of the men standing behind him was the vice commander, Yang Guang. With a calm look, he informed him that all 300 geniuses were present. He asked him to please prepare to go up on stage and lead the opening ceremony. The old man sheathed his sword and began walking towards the stage. The people who were present in the camp started conversing among themselves. Some had heard that there were many Tianjiao camps in the Jiangnan area, but none had ever had a king-level figure in charge. For them, this was terrifying, as even standing dozens of meters back, the king of the celestial sword could kill them with a single move. One of them explained to the others that this was very strange since they had said that the old master was living in seclusion. He didn't know why he was coming out now. Some of them just heard the instructors talking privately that it seemed like the old master was going to take the initiative to ask for this. They didn't know if he wanted to recruit a disciple. If this were the case, then they should do well. Although some knew well that people like them should stop dreaming about it, because if he really were recruiting, then he would only recruit the best. Tang Ying started to stare at the old man and couldn't help but be shocked to see that the old celestial had come. Bai Feng, who was standing next to her, began to look at the old man with a surprised gaze and couldn't help but feel excited as he had finally met the living legend in person. Xiao Beihan started to look at the old man with a determined gaze and decided to defeat Jiang Wushuang once the camp began in order to leave a good impression on the old master. Wushuang cracked his fingers and couldn't help but feel excited since he had thought they wouldn't be able to invite the old man. He decided to make him his master. Mu Hankyu clenched her fists tightly, brought them close to her face, and couldn't help but be left open-mouthed and astonished at the same time. Jiang started pointing at the old man with his finger and with a confused look asked Luo Sandao if they recognized that powerful old master. She got very excited, approached Jiang, clenched her fists, and with a joyful look responded yes. She had been hearing about his legends since she was young. She began to recall the old man's incredible feats. One day a powerful red dragon appeared, but the old man jumped on its head and using all his strength drove the sword into its skull, causing it to open its mouth and start screaming in pain. She explained to Jiang that the old man was not an awakener but could suppress a group of 7th transfer seal kings and become number 1 under the Zhen Empire. His skills were even comparable to those of an 8th transfer from the Zhen Empire. Once he had killed a dragon with a single blow. Mu Hankyu put her hand under her chin, closed her eyes and began to think. She explained to them that although both were at the level of a seal king, the senior celestial leaf king was the most respected existence by her grandfather. Her grandfather once asked her to become his disciple, but he rejected her. At first she was very frustrated, but then heard that many descendants of the Zhen Empire and Invincibles had also been rejected. Jiang started looking at the old man and with a confused look asked them if they were sure it was very difficult to become his disciple. Mu Hankyu approached Jiang and with a sincere look asked him if he was joking. As far as she knew, Jiang Wushuang and Bai Feng had been rejected by the sword god before. Jiang had seen Jiang Wushuang and the rest of their abilities. It was unimaginable how difficult it was to become a disciple of the old man. Upon hearing this, Jiang began to look at her with a shocked expression and started to wonder if it was really that difficult to become the old man's disciple. Luo Sandao approached them. She began pointing towards the sky with her finger, and with a serious look explained to them that they might not know it, but the old master had only accepted 2 disciples in his entire life, and that had been more than 20 years ago. Jiang began to recall how the old man had been hugging the tree like a lunatic. He also remembered how when he was putting away the sword he had asked him if he was willing to learn from him. Jiang closed his eyes and began to question whether the strange old man who climbed trees was the king of the celestial sword that everyone was really talking about. According to him, they did not seem like the same person. While a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, with a forced smile he responded that now he understood everything. The old man got on stage and coughed to get everyone's attention. With a serious look, he introduced himself as Gu Kaishan, the chief instructor of Tianjiao camp. He put both hands on the table and reminded everyone that, as they all already knew, the Tianjiao camp in their Jiangnan area had been performing below average in recent years because the fights here were just a farce. If one did not dare to give it their all here, in a real battlefield with real dangers, they would only end up dead and without burial. He revealed to everyone that there were more and more monsters in this world. He grabbed the microphone tightly and with a smile told them that they needed more capable geniuses. Therefore, to better showcase and unleash their geniuses' abilities and make a better selection. This year he had established a new rule for the Tianjiao camp in the Jiangnan area. He called this rule Death Quota. Upon hearing this, Yang Guang, who was standing behind him, couldn't help but be shocked. With a look full of fear, he interrupted Gu Kaishan and tried to stop him. but he put his hand in front of him indicating that he should not speak anymore, and with a smile explained to everyone that here he was the one who had the last word. Therefore, if something happened, he was going to take all the responsibility. Yang Guang started sweating like crazy, and with a confused look began to wonder what death rate Gu Kaishan was talking about. His superiors had not mentioned this before, and there hadn't been one before in the history of Tianjiao camps. There were many powerful geniuses down there, so he didn't know if this was going to create chaos. Gu Kaishan took the microphone, brought it close to his mouth, and with a serious look told them that today 10 of them were going to die for him in each round of the test. He also added that if anyone wanted to withdraw, they could do so now. Many of the participants panicked. A boy started looking at his friend with a look full of fear and explained to him that although this was terrible, he couldn't withdraw because otherwise his whole family would be shamed. His friend swallowed hard and with a trembling voice told him that he didn't want to die. Wu Shuang, who was standing in front of them with crossed arms, remained calm, began to smile, and thought that this was expected from the senior Celestial Blade King. According to him, the Tianjiao camp and Jiangnan area should have done this years ago. Xiao Beihen turned his head back, started staring at Jiang, and with a smile came to the conclusion that this rule had been made especially for him. When the camp starts later, he was going to be able to fulfill 2 of the old master's quota. Jiang started looking at Xiao Beihen and began wondering what this guy was plotting. With a calm look, he concluded that with this quota, even if the conflict escalated later and he killed Xiao Beihen, Uncle Jai Gang and the others wouldn't have to worry too much. Several minutes passed and no one withdrew. Seeing this, Gu Kaiten, who was holding the microphone in one hand, put his other hand on his waist and couldn't help but start smiling, since according to him it seemed like everyone had some pride. Behind him stood the 4 vice commanders. He extended his hand to one side and with a shout announced that the entrance evaluation to the camp had officially begun. There were 300 people in the first round. Half of them were going to be eliminated. He grabbed the hilt of his sword, and while unsheathing it, with a serious look he explained to them that within the camp, 150 advancement flags had been randomly hidden. He also added that he didn't care what methods they used to get the flags. The round was going to end at dawn on the second day, and those who had the flags would advance to the next round. He unsheathed his sword, began pointing its blade at them, and while his eyes were shining, asked them to fight confidently and kill confidently. They could fight alone or form alliances. They were even allowed to destroy the entire camp if they wished. In short, he wanted to see their bloodlust. After saying this, he raised the sword to the sky and gave everyone the order to disperse as the test had begun. Upon hearing his order, everyone started running backward. Some knew that with their current skills, the best method was to find flags, hide, and avoid ruthless people. According to them, this was the safest way to advance to the next round. While everyone was running, Xiao Beihen began to smile. As his body was surrounded by a powerful blue energy, he unsheathed his sword, extended it to one side, and started walking towards Jiang. While little by little he was getting closer, Jiang, who was standing next to Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao, remained silent. Jiang extended his hands to the sides, started staring at Xiao Beihen, and gave them the order to look for nearby advance flags since he was going to take care of him. Mu Hankyu did not know what Jiang was thinking. With a panicked look she asked him if he was sure. Just before she could finish the sentence, he extended his hand to one side, adopted a defensive pose, and told her that this was an order. Upon hearing this, Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao turned their backs on him and started running. While Xiao Beihen's body was surrounded by powerful blue mana, he began to laugh and mocked him by asking if a rookie like him who hadn't even made a second transfer wanted to be a hero. Jiang extended his hand to one side, causing it to start releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. Although Xiao Beihen's sword energy was truly astonishing, it was much inferior compared to Xiao Yuanwu's. Even though he was now much stronger than before, he didn't know if it would be possible for him to deal with Xiao Beihen using only poison without exposing the existence of the mother insect. With a calm look, he asked him to stop talking nonsense. Xiao Beihen listened and decided not to waste more words on a dead corpse. Using all his strength, he launched a powerful slash towards Jiang. While Jiang's body was surrounded by Little Nine's poisonous mist, he prepared himself for defense. But just before Xiao Beihen's attack could reach him, someone asked him to stop and threw some small knives at his attack, shattering it into pieces. This person was none other than Tang Ying. While she was holding knives in her hands, she began to stare at Xiao Beihen with an angry look. Xiao Beihen, who was holding the sword with one hand, began to look at her with a serious expression and asked what she was doing. When looking to the side, Jiang saw Tang Ying with a surprised look. He began to question whether she was the female assassin. Tang Ying put her hands on her hips, approached him, and shouted if he had forgotten their agreement with Bei Feng. They had agreed to kill Wu Shuang once the camp started, yet he constantly went off to deal with insignificant matters. She didn't know if he was using these excuses deliberately because he was actually afraid of Wu Shuang. Xiao Beihan clenched his fist tightly and with an angry look asked her who had said that he was afraid. Both turned their backs on Jiang and started walking towards the area where Wu Shuang was. Xiao Beihan, who was furious, asked her where he was. He decided to deal with him first since it wasn't too late to handle the trash afterward. Tang Ying began pointing in the direction where Wu Shuang was and explained that he had headed towards the forest and Bai Feng was chasing him now. Jiang deactivated Little Nine's poisonous mist, started looking at them and felt relieved since things had really taken a turn. He didn't know who Tang Ying was but felt that she was intentionally helping him. Once they moved away a bit, Tang Ying turned back, put her finger near her mouth and winked at him. Seeing this, he realized that she was indeed helping him. But he didn't know why since they didn't even know each other. She began to look down with a sad expression. She was the niece of Tang Jin. His aunt had asked her to secretly take care of Jiang Chen in the Tanjiao camp. But with her current abilities, she couldn't fight Xiao Beihan directly. She could only use Wu Shuang's name to try to delay his movements. A man with black hair who was carrying a bow on his back and holding several flags in his hands approached them, knelt before him, and explained that his father was the subordinate of his grandfather. These 3 advancement flags he had were a sign of his dedication to him. He was the 6th venerable transfer descendant named Huang Yongchao. Xiao Beihan approached him and with a serious look told him that he did not need the flags. He also added that if he really wanted to show his loyalty, then he could help him do something. Tang Ying crossed her arms and remained silent. Huang Yongchao, who was kneeling before him, explained that his subordinate would serve him with the utmost loyalty. Tang Ying began to look at Xiao Beihan and thought that this was not good since now Jiang would have to take care of this himself. But she hoped that Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao could protect him. At the same time, Luo Sandao obtained 2 advancement flags. While she was holding them in her hand, she closed her eyes and with a joyful smile explained to Jiang that she had just found 2 flags. She arrived at the area where Jiang was and placed the flags on the table. Jiang, who had one hand resting on his waist, with a calm voice asked them both to take the flags first since he was going to another place to take a look. She rested both hands on it and told him that they were going to help him find it together, and Mu Hankyu, who was standing next to her, crossed her arms and remained silent. At that moment, someone shot an arrow, which began to move at great speed towards them. Jiang didn't take long to sense this. He put his hand under the table and asked them to be careful. Just before the arrow could get close, Jiang threw the table into the sky with all his strength, causing it to collide directly with the arrow. The attack was so powerful that the table was shattered into pieces. Luo Sandao started looking up and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but panic and start feeling scared as she didn't know what was happening. She quickly hid behind Jiang, placed both hands on his arm, and peeked out a little to see what was happening. He went on alert and with a serious look, shouted and asked who was attacking and if they wanted to steal their flags. Mu Hankyu drew the 2 daggers, held them in both hands, and adopted a defensive stance. The person who had launched the attack was none other than Huang Yongchao. He jumped, drew his bow, started aiming at Jiang, and while the arrow was surrounded by a powerful energy, he began to stare at him and revealed that he did not want the flag but wanted to take his life. He prepared to shoot the arrow towards Jiang, causing the arrow to start emitting even more energy. They looked up at the sky and upon seeing that it was Huang Yongchao, they revealed to Jiang that he had the hidden profession called Extreme Archer of the Sun Chaser. He was level 39 and his father was a venerable of 6th transfer. He was a subordinate of Xiao from the Zhang Empire. Luo Sandao did not know if her Eternal Earth Shield would be able to stop the attack. With a penetrating gaze, Huang Yongchao launched the arrow towards them. It began advancing at great speed towards them. The blade grew larger and was covered in energy. As the arrow gradually approached, Jiang decided to do something about it. He asked both of them to step aside. He jumped, and while his eyes were shining, he began to advance towards the attack. He extended his hand, causing the palm to start releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. With an angry look, he explained to them that he could tolerate everything else, but if they wanted to kill him, then they shouldn't blame him for being ruthless since after all someone had to fulfill the old master's death quota. Luo Sandao, who was behind Jiang, couldn't help but clutch her chest in fear, and Mu Hankyu, who was holding the 2 daggers, started looking at him with a surprised expression and couldn't help but begin wondering what he planned to do. Jiang launched Little Nine's poisonous mist towards Huang Yongchao, blocking the attack. The mist was so powerful that it not only blocked the attack but also shattered it, and began advancing towards him. While Huang Yongchao was flying in the air, the poisonous mist approached him. While holding the bow with one hand, he started looking around, and upon seeing poison, he couldn't help but panic since he had been told that Jiang was of the life type. With a look full of fear, he asked others not to hide and to come attack all together. Just before he could finish speaking, Little Nine's poisonous mist reached him and impacted his body, corroding and tearing him into pieces, causing him to start screaming in agony. The poisonous mist grew larger and the insects began to devour his body. His companions turned their backs on him and started to flee out of fear. They did not want to fight against a guy who had awakened the hidden poison class. Now that even long-range shooters like Huang Yongchao had not been able to deal with him, much less would those who had close combat classes be able to. They thought they were lucky since they escaped in time. Otherwise, they would have been cannon fodder. In a matter of seconds, the insects began to devour Huang Yongchao's body. Jiang, who was standing next to him, was controlling the swarm of insects. At the same time, in the observation room were Yang Guang and Gu Kaishan watching everything that was happening in the camp through some cameras. Gu Kaishan started to look at Jiang, and seeing how strong he was, he couldn't help but praise him upon noticing that he not only had the creation class, but also had the poison class. Yang Guang, who was standing behind him, was speechless. With a surprised look, he began to wonder how it was possible that Jiang had killed so quickly a second transformation prodigy. For him, Jiang Chen was incredible. He didn't know why Chuozheng City's Night Watch hadn't reported anything. While he was deep in his thoughts, Gu Kaishan turned his head towards him and with a serious look asked him to go inform the others and also bring some great masters of the spatial system since this was an emergency moment. They needed transfer at any time to prevent Jiang from killing too many people. Hearing his voice, Yang Guang snapped out of his trance and responded affirmatively, deciding to go inform immediately. He turned his back on him, started running, clenched his teeth tightly, and with a worried look decided to take advantage of the fact that the elder had not changed his mind to leave quickly, because if the prodigies really began a massacre, then the consequences would be unimaginable. Gu Kaishan put his hand under his chin, started observing Jiang, and coughed to get Yang Guang's attention. Upon hearing his voice, he stopped running, turned around with a surprised look and asked if there was any problem. Deep down, he didn't know if this old man was regretting all of this. Gu Kaishan put his hand under his chin, started looking at the ceiling with a lost gaze, and asked him to bring 10 third-level ferocious beasts and release them separately. He also gave the order to place the advance flag on the ferocious beasts. Yang Guang turned around, gave a military salute, and with a confused look responded with an understood. He couldn't help but be somewhat impressed since the move the old man had just made was astonishing, because in this way, those demons could go first to fight for the advance flag and avoid harming others. At the same time, Tang Yin, Bai Feng, and Xiao Beihan surrounded Wu Shuang. The three drew their weapons and prepared to attack, while on the other side he crossed his arms. Bai Feng had been fighting against him for several minutes and was quite tired. He put his hand on his chest where he had the wound and began to pant heavily. Wu Shuang started looking at him and reminded them again that even if they joined forces they wouldn't be able to defeat him. He didn't know if they really wanted to die. He mocked them by asking if they would feel proud after winning in a 1-against-3 fight. Xiao Beihan gripped the sword tightly, causing the blade to start emitting a powerful blue energy. He began to stare intently at him and explained that although it was dishonorable to win with superior numbers, he couldn't avoid fighting people who weren't boring. At that moment, the loudspeaker started to sound and notified everyone that Huang Yongchao had been eliminated by Jiang Cheng. Upon hearing this, everyone was in shock as they couldn't believe Jiang had made the first kill. Unlike the others, Wu Shuang remained calm. With a worried look, Xiao Beihan thought that although Huang Yongchao had average strength, at least he was good and was in the second transformation. In this camp full of geniuses, he was among the top 50. He was much stronger than Xiao Yuanwu and yet had been killed in the blink of an eye. Tang Ying, who was holding several knives with her fingers, with a terrified look, she thought that this was not good since her aunt had told her that Jiang was only level 26 of the creation class. She did not know how he, a person of level 26, could have instantly killed a person of level 39 from the combat class. Not even she, an assassin, could have killed Huang Yongchao so quickly. Bai Feng started looking towards the sky and with a smile came to the conclusion that this time the Tanjiao camp was full of hidden talents. Wu Shuang brought his hand to his face, started looking at them, and with a smile asked if they were not going to face an expert like Jiang. They ignored him and prepared to attack again. But just before they could make a move, the camp notified everyone that 10 third level fierce beasts were going to be released and each one was going to have an advancement flag. Everyone who possessed the advancement flag would get an additional score in the ranking. All those who were among the top 10 would receive a reward, with the first place reward being 100 million. Upon hearing this, Xiao Beihan and the others jumped and moved away from the area. Wu Shuang, who had his arms crossed, began to smile. Once everyone left, he stood still and thought that the King of Celestial Sword had given them new toys. He thought this was fine and decided to compete for and seize the blue flag. At the same time, Jiang started to look to one side and couldn't help but be surprised when he remembered that they had just entered the camp and the first place was already going to receive a reward of 100 million. For him, this prodigy camp was too generous. If he took first place and obtained the rewards and resources, the insects would be able to reproduce faster again. At that moment, something giant began to fall from the sky. Jiang, who wasn't far away, went on alert and started wondering what this was. A giant mutant beast in the shape of a wolf fell from the sky and landed near Jiang. Lu Sandao, who was next to him, explained that the first fierce beast had fallen beside them. Jiang began to look at the beast with a confused gaze and realized that this was a third-level beast. Mu Hankyu, who was nearby, panicked and asked everyone to be careful since the strength of this beast was equivalent to a level 90 awakened. Little by little, the beast started to stand up. Lu Sandao looked with some attention and she realized that it was in a state of paralysis. She asked him if they should take advantage of this situation. While little by little the beast was getting to its feet and regaining consciousness, Jiang began to advance towards it and prepared to attack, making his hands start to release the poisonous mist. He decided to take advantage of this and asked the others to move away. He prepared to attack, but at that moment someone launched a powerful slash towards him. However, he reacted in time, jumped and dodged the attack at the last second. He couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as he didn't know who had launched this attack. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground, clenched his fist tightly and began to wonder what was happening. The person who had launched the attack was Xiao Beihan. He was standing on top of the beast's head and holding the sword with one hand. He began to stare at Jiang and with a smile thought that not only had he killed Huang Yongchao in a second, but now he dared to steal the advance flag. Jiang extended his hand towards him, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, and asked him if he was going to fight then stop all this talk. Xiao Beihan jumped and used the technique called Heaven and Earth Wind Dragon Slash. He launched a powerful slash towards him which started destroying everything in its path. His attack collided with Jiang's, causing the poisonous mist to start disappearing. He positioned himself on top of the beast's head, and while his sword was surrounded by a powerful energy, he thought it was no wonder that Jiang was so arrogant since it turned out that he had the hidden poison type. It was said that the poison type was difficult to handle, but in front of his sword's wind, it amounted to nothing. Mu Hankyu clashed her fist with her palm, started looking at him and with a serious look thought that Jiang was in danger since the wind could face and defeat the poison type. She thought they should help him as soon as possible. Lu Sandao, who was next to her, started looking at her with a surprised look and explained to her that Jiang's poison wasn't an ordinary poison. If they went to help, all they would do is cause more problems. Jiang adopted an offensive stance, and while his body was surrounded by poison, he began to stare intently at Xiao Beihan and decided it was time to end this. He used the technique called Poisonous Mist Dragon, causing a giant dragon made of poison to appear. It opened its mouth and prepared to attack. Seeing the size of the dragon, Xiao Beihan couldn't help but panic and think that this wasn't good. He decided not to stand idly by, grabbed the sword firmly, brought his fingers close to the blade of the sword, and realizing that this poisonous mist was not going to disperse with a strike, decided to absorb it. The dragon opened its mouth and prepared to attack. He extended the sword towards the sky and used the technique forbidden spell called Immortal Swordsman of Blue Lotus, causing a giant flower to appear behind him. The giant flower began to absorb the poison dragon. He asked him to watch how his sword's energy was going to consume all of his poisonous mist. While Jiang's eyes were shining, he started to smile and asked if he was serious. With his sword energy blocking the view, it was even easier to swallow. Little Nine manifested herself. She closed her eyes, opened her mouth, and began to consume the flower that Xiao Beihan had created. For her, this sword energy was very delicious. Thanks to this, Jiang gained 2,000 devouring value. He started looking at Little Nine and thought she was eating the whole flower. He reached out his hand towards the sky, and in the blink of an eye, the flower that Xiao Beihan had created broke into pieces, releasing poisonous mist. The poisonous mist attacked Xiao Beihan, causing his body to be thrown backward and crash into the ground. He opened his mouth and began to scream in pain. Jiang clenched both fists tightly, and now that little Nine had consumed the energy of the flower, the poison dragon became even bigger and more terrifying. Xiao Beihan fell to the ground, grabbed the sword with one hand, and thought this was not possible. He did not know what kind of poison could annihilate a sword's energy. Jiang attacked him using the poison dragon, but just before the attack could impact against him, he hugged himself and used the life gem, causing a barrier to appear around his body. He took the sword, stood up, and seeing that his poison couldn't break through the life gem's shield, he thought Jiang was doomed to die. He started looking at him and thought that the Xiao family really had second chances, but it was a pity because in this battlefield there were cameras everywhere, and he couldn't let the insects reveal their true form. He turned his head to one side where Lu Sandao was and with a calm look asked if she could create an opaque earth shield that covered the entire place. She clenched both fists tightly and told him that she would try. She extended her hands towards the sky, causing her energy to start advancing towards the sky. She used the technique called Earth Protection Shield, cover. By doing this, a shield was created around the area. Xiao Beihan started to look towards the sky with a confused look and asked him what he was doing. Lu Sandao put both hands on her knees, lowered her head, and began to pant heavily as she had used a lot of energy to create the shield. While Jiang's hand was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he started looking at him and asked if he could guess how while Xiao Beihan's body was surrounded by the magical barrier. He extended the sword to one side and with an angry look asked Jiang if he was really comparing the worthless power of that piece of trash with his. According to him, Jiang was naive. Jiang simply remained calm and silent for several seconds. At that moment, Little Nine reappeared. She began to stare at Xiao Beihan with a sinister look and started to smile. While Jiang's body was surrounded by Little Nine's poisonous mist, with a calm look he asked him if he was really comparing the current him to the past him. Thinking this way was indeed naive, he began to get tired of him and ordered Little Nine to manifest and give him a beating. She extended her hands to the sides and while her body was releasing a powerful energy, she began to advance towards Xiao Beihan and decided to follow Jiang's order. Xiao Beihan put the sword in front of his face to defend himself from the attack, and with a confused look he began to wonder who she was. Little Nine started moving at high speed and began attacking him, but he started blocking the attacks using the sword, no matter from which direction she attacked. He managed to block all the attacks. Upon seeing this, Jiang was surprised. With a perplexed look he began to wonder if he was using the energy of the protective sword. He did not expect Xiao Beihan to have this kind of ability at a moment like this. Luckily for Xiao Beihan, the beast appeared. It gave a great leap, opened its mouth and prepared to attack Little Nine. She and he started looking to one side and upon seeing this they went on alert. Jiang didn't take long to realize what was going to happen. He extended his hand towards her, causing his hand to start emitting the poisonous mist. He began staring intently at the beast and upon seeing that it had also awakened, he decided that now it was time to unleash all their power. He extended his hand towards the beast and summoned 2 dragons made of poisonous mist and gave them the order to corrode Xiao Beihan and cover Little Nine. He also summoned the small insects and told them that there was top quality fierce beast meat. The first to arrive would be the first to eat the beast. Upon hearing this, they appeared, started advancing towards them and prepared to attack. Now that the dragons and small insects had appeared, Little Nine began running towards him and started smiling. Xiao Beihan put both arms in front of his face and thought this was not good since the sword's energy had been corroded and now he could no longer cause damage. The beast turned around, opened its mouth and seeing that Little Nine was ready to attack, began to roar to warn Xiao Beihan about the attack. Little Nine approached him and now that he could no longer block the attacks, she began to hit the magic barrier with all her strength. Her fists started impacting against the barrier and it gradually began to weaken. Jiang, who was nearby, started watching them and realized that Xiao Zhenguo favored some grandchildren over others, and for this reason it was much more difficult to defeat Xiao Beihan than Xiao Yuanwu. She began to hit even harder, and little by little the barrier started to crack. While her eyes were shining, she started staring at him. Xiao Beihan, who was inside the barrier, couldn't help but start sweating and panicking. Even though the barrier was strong, Little Nine was going to break it with blows. It was only a matter of time. If before she had needed 3 seconds, now she would need at most 3 minutes. At the same time in the surveillance room, Yuan Guang began to observe the fight. According to the screen, it could be seen that there was a blue magical barrier in the area which prevented people outside from seeing inside. Upon seeing this, he realized that Xiao Beihan was at a disadvantage now that Jiang had blocked the surveillance. He gave Fang Chengyuan the order to conduct a manual investigation, and if the situation was not good, to stop the combat immediately. He was Fang Chengyuan, the great master of the 4th level of the spatial system. He joined his fingertips together and with a serious look responded with an understood. Behind him sat Gu Kaishan, who had his legs crossed and his head resting on his hand. He remained somewhat confused as he couldn't believe that their superiors didn't want Chen Guo's grandson to be injured or end up dead. Yuan Guang turned around, put his arms behind his back, and with a calm voice explained to him that although that was true, no one knew what would happen if he got injured or ended up dead. He didn't know if he was really prepared for a battle with Xiao Zhengguo. He also asked him if Commander Duan from the Jiangnan War District knew about this. Gu Kaishan started looking at him and remained silently thinking. Feeling his gaze, Yuan Guang couldn't help but panic. With a confused look, he told him that although he had ordered the prohibition of leaking any information within the Tanjiao camp, once it ended, the superiors would know what had really happened. Gu Kaishan, who had his head resting on his fist, began to look at the ceiling with a lost gaze and sank into his thoughts. He knew that Xiao Beihan's strength was also considered outstanding. He didn't know if Jiang Chen could really kill him, and neither did he understand why he had created an anti-vision barrier. At the same time, Jiang's attack succeeded and he defeated the beast without much difficulty. While its body was surrounded by poisonous mist, it began to fall to the ground. Jiang, who was beside it, crossed his arms and thought that although this fierce beast was powerful, when facing the insects, it had really found its nemesis. Little Nine's attacks also started to take effect, and now Xiao Beihan's barrier had several cracks and was about to break. She walked away, clenched her fist tightly, and upon seeing this, couldn't help but start to smile. He grabbed the sword tightly and panicked at the thought that this was the end. He didn't know how it was possible that the life jade was starting to break. In the barrier there was a crack much larger and deeper than the others. Jiang began to look at the barrier and with a calm voice asked Little Nine to attack from this part since this was the weak point. At that moment, the voice of someone entered his head and asked him not to play too much since the great master of the space system named Fang Chengyuan had arrived. Upon hearing this, Jiang's expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but be shocked and panic at the same time. He reached out to Little Nine, began to absorb her and gave her the order to return. Little Nine, who had a clenched fist and was hitting the barrier, couldn't help but be somewhat confused as she didn't know what was happening. Now that an instructor who had a spatial system had sent a telepathic warning, he needed to finish this fight quickly or else he would be discovered. He summoned a giant insect, which began to approach the magic barrier and started to explode. Xiao Beihan, who was inside the barrier, started to look at the insect with a perplexed gaze and couldn't help but start sweating and panicking as he didn't know what this was. Just before he could realize what was really going to happen, it was already too late. The insect that Jiang had summoned exploded, causing the energy to start entering inside the barrier. Because of this, a great explosion began to generate inside. The energy that was inside the barrier was so great that once it broke, it created a great explosion with the same force as a nuclear explosion. The explosion also broke the barrier that Luo Sandow had created. She put both hands on her belly and started falling to the ground. Lu Hankyu, who was next to her, started running towards her, reached out her hand to grab her, and she asked her if she was okay. The explosion also created a large curtain of smoke. Several seconds later, once the curtain of smoke began to disappear, it could be seen that part of the ground was broken. There were flags lying on the ground, and now all that remained of Xiao Beihan was his arm and his sword. Jiang approached the area, took his sword, started looking at the arm, and seeing that only his arm remained, he began to question whether he had been rescued by the Great Master. Now that he had doubts, he decided to take the arm first as interest since he would have the opportunity to recover the capital later. He approached Luo Sandow, threw her the sword and asked her to take good care of the sword that belonged to her family. As little by little the sword was descending towards the ground, she raised her hands to catch it, and while she was starting to blush she thanked him. Mu Hankyu picked up the flags that were lying on the ground and Luo Sandow picked up the sword. Both approached Jiang. She had collected 3 advancement flags, so she told him that they were already among the top 10. Jiang decided to share the flags with them, but Mu Hankyu refused since she wanted to see him surpass Jiang Wushuang and win first place, and Luo Sandow also refused because for her having the sword was more than enough. At the same time, someone slammed the table hard. This person was Yuan Guang, and next to him was Fang Chengyuan. He put both hands on the table and with an angry look asked him what he was doing and why he hadn't been able to teleport Xiao Beihan in time. At the beginning, he closed his eyes and stayed thinking in silence. Then he opened them and with a calm voice explained that the poisonous fog was too strong. His spiritual energy had barely approached it. He hadn't seen anything clearly and the energy was corroded by the poison. Then he heard an explosion. He had tried to teleport Xiao Beihan with all his strength, but it was already too late. Yuan Guang started pointing at him with his finger, began staring into his eyes intently, and asked how it was possible for the poison to corrode mental power. After saying this, he told him not to excuse himself from responsibility. At that moment, someone gave a loud shout and ordered Yuan Guang to shut up. Upon hearing that, he stood up, turned around and with a trembling voice tried to apologize. This person was Gu Kaishan. He started staring at Yuan Guang and with an angry look asked him if he knew why he always got stuck at the peak of the 5th transformation. He explained that the reason was because he always followed the powerful and could not pass the test of the heart. A moment ago, he had mentioned the great general of the sword, consequences and so on, and for this reason he hadn't even bothered to respond. If Gu Kaishan dared to do it, he also dared to assume the consequences on the battlefield. Even those invincible in 9 transformations could die in combat, so Xiao Beihan was nobody. Yuan Guang took several steps back, got a little nervous and explained that he had not mentioned Xiao Zhenguo. He had only mentioned Commander Duan. Gu Kaishan turned his back to him, slightly turned his head back, clenched his fist and with a calm look gave him the order to first report inside the camp but keeping the information strictly confidential outside. Tomorrow at 6 before the evaluation and the camp ended, no one eliminated could be allowed to leave the camp, including Xiao Beihan. He turned his back on them, started walking towards the door and told them that first he was going to go to the Southern Theater Command. Yuan Guang and Fang Chengyuan started looking at him and remained silent. At the same time, a system window appeared in the sky and informed everyone that Xiao Beihan had been eliminated by Jiang Chen. Everyone started looking towards the sky and upon seeing this, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded as they were unable to believe that Xiao Beihan had been eliminated. They were in shock and thought they had heard wrong since he was the legitimate grandson of the great general of the nation. In another part of the camp, a beast in the shape of a boar appeared. It tried to attack Tang Ying and Bai Feng, but they jumped and dodged the attack without much effort, causing its body to hit the ground. Tang Ying couldn't help but stay in shock. She couldn't believe that Zhang had really eliminated Xiao Beihan. Bai Feng remained calm, and with a serious look thought this was very strange. In another part of the camp, a beast in the shape of a white lion appeared, but someone gave it a strong blow causing its body to hit the ground. The person who had defeated this beast was Wushwang. He sat on top of the corpse of it, crossed his arms and started to smile and thought that this was very interesting. Someone started to open the lid of the cup. This person was the commander-in-chief of the Jiangnan military district, named Duan Xinghai. After removing the lid from the cup, he began to bring it closer to his mouth for a sip, started staring at Gu Kaishan, and asked if he had found any good talent for which he had urgently summoned him. In front of him was Gu Kaishan, who closed his eyes, extended his hand towards the sky, used an ability called Forbidden Listening, and while his hand was surrounded by powerful energy, he concentrated. Duan Xinghai started to look at him and remained silent. Gu Kaishan's energy began to advance towards the sky and started to create a barrier around the area. Once the barrier was successfully created, both went to another room, sat down to have a cup of tea and chat a bit. Duan Xinghai crossed his legs, took the cup of tea and asked him why he was being so cautious, and it didn't take long for him to realize that this matter was more important than it seemed. Gu Kaishan, who had one hand resting on the chair, placed the other on the table, and remembering that old Duan had extensive knowledge and was theoretical, he decided to ask him something. He began to stare at Duan and with a serious look asked if poison could corrode mental strength. Duan took the teacup, started bringing it closer to his mouth, closed his eyes and with a smile explained that theoretically it was possible, but it was very difficult, adding that poisonous mist and miasma affected the physical body, but mental strength was different. Mental strength consisted of the source of the soul which belonged to thoughts, forming a kind of intention energy. To corrode this energy, Duan could not estimate the intensity of poison needed. Gu Kaishan started to look at Duan and with a serene gaze asked him if he had seen anyone manage to do this. Duan put his hand under his chin, began to look at the ground and with a thoughtful look replied that no, adding that he knew a poison king who was at the pinnacle of the 4th transformation. But even so he could not do it. Duan raised his head and with an insinuating look asked him if perhaps in the Tianjiao camp there had emerged a poison prodigy with terrifying power. If someone could really corrode spiritual strength, then it was a lethal weapon. Gu Kaishin crossed his arms, started shaking his head, closed his eyes, and revealed that a conclusion could not yet be reached. Duan remained calm. Since Gu Kaishin had volunteered for the Tanjiao camp, he hadn't asked anything out of respect. But now he asked if something was happening and also why he wasn't telling the truth. Gu Kaishin opened his eyes, started looking Duan in the eyes, and asked if it was possible that the poisonous mist had its own consciousness. Duan reached out to him, started laughing, and asked if he was joking. He didn't know how poison could have consciousness, unless it wasn't actually poison and just a form of camouflage. Upon hearing this, Gu Kaishin realized something. With a perplexed look, he asked Duan what the form of camouflage was. While a drop of sweat was falling from Duan's cheek, with a calm look, he began to think. Several seconds later, he remembered something. He started to imagine some ancient ruins that were somewhere in the realm. He had seen in ruin number 0 a record which mentioned a kind of calamitous insect called 9 wings miasma that could transform into the form of poisonous mist. He began to imagine little 9 hugging her legs. She had been born in the 9 hells. Her birth had caused a great ancient calamity, which had almost destroyed the world in the past. Upon hearing the name 9 wings of miasma and ancient calamity, Gu Kaishin couldn't help but become alert and think that this was not good. Duan extended his hands to the sides, closed his eyes, started laughing out loud, and asked him if he was scared. He also mentioned that this type of calamity had been extinct for a long time. Nowadays it was impossible for it to exist. Gu Kaishin remained silent. Then a portal in the shape of a crack began to appear. He got up from the chair, turned his back on him, and while he was walking towards the portal, he no longer had any doubt that Duan was the chief commander since he could explain everything reasonably. Today he had learned a lot. He said goodbye to him with the excuse that he had some matters to attend to at Tanjiao camp. Duan extended his hand towards him to try to stop him and continue talking. He asked him to wait as he still hadn't told him the good news. But Gu Kaishin paid no attention and entered inside the portal. Once inside, he crossed his arms, closed his eyes, thought of little 9 and how she was a natural disaster. It was no longer surprising to him that Jiang Chen, who had awakened a divine level class called Growth of All Things, was strong enough to become number 1 on the hunter list. He opened his eyes and with a serious look thought that Jiang still had many secrets. This in Dazia was grounds for decapitation. According to him, Jai Gang was a traitorous master who was really causing problems. A few days ago, Jai Gang appeared with a pleasant smile and explained that he had someone named Jiang with excellent talent but not yet fully developed. He also added that he even got into trouble with the Xiao family. He hoped Gu Kaishin could take care of him while he was at the Tanjiao camp. He turned around and listened silently. Back to the present, he started walking towards the other end of the portal, and it didn't take long for him to realize that Jai Gang had asked him to take care of him, but in reality wanted him to cover for him. He exited the portal, and while he had one hand behind his back, he snapped his fingers with the other. The sword could kill, but it could also protect the world. Buddha and demon were in a single heart. He had said that he wanted to make Jiang his disciple, so from now on he was going to be under his protection. He started walking and thought that calamities should not be underestimated, so to avoid misunderstandings, he decided first let Hong Yao confirm it to be more sure. He launched an arrow, which started to move backward at great speed. This arrow contained an order for Hong Yao. He had to go in the name of the master to relic number 0 to investigate the 9-winged miasma calamity. It was related to his little apprentice brother, so he asked him to be very careful. He entered the surveillance room where Yang Guang was and asked how the entrance evaluation for the camp was going. Yang Guang turned his head back and with a calm look explained that it was coming to an end. Those awakened with ordinary talents were competing among themselves to get the flags, and elite talents had already taken care of 9 fierce beasts. Now only one remained. A powerful beast appeared, but Lei Zi and Liu Baizai joined forces to defeat it. The beast tried to attack, but he gave it a strong punch in the face, causing its body to crash into the ground. Then another fierce beast appeared. Tang Ying and Bai Feng began to collaborate with each other to kill it. She jumped up, climbed on top of it, and ended its life. At the same time, behind Zhang Washuang there was a pile of beast corpses. He had instantly killed 3 fierce beasts that had been released in the area. After doing this, he started heading towards the direction where Jiang was. Gu Kaishin started looking at the screen, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be perplexed. He asked him where Jiang Chen was. In response, he revealed that Jiang had killed a total of 2 fierce beasts, and they had just released the 9th fierce beast near him. The 9th ferocious beast appeared, jumped, and prepared to attack Jiang. He and the others started looking towards the sky, and upon seeing the beast, he couldn't help but feel happy as now he was going to get another flag. As the beast was slowly approaching, Jiang extended his hand, and while his eyes were shining, he began to smile and told Little Nine that it was time to eat again. Just before the beast could approach and attack, Jiang extended his hand towards it, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist in the process, which quickly started advancing towards it. Little Nine manifested, and without much effort began to devour the beast. Thanks to this, he obtained 2,000 devouring value. The body of the beast fell to the ground, and Little Nine slowly began to devour it. Jiang, who was standing beside, simply remained silent. While Little Nine was devouring the beast, she ascended from level 21 to level 22. And upon doing so, she couldn't help but start smiling. Upon seeing that she had leveled up, Jiang couldn't help but start smiling with joy. His joy didn't last long as a fist made of spiritual energy appeared in the sky and began to descend towards them. They looked up and upon seeing this, went on alert. ManhwaCapped drew her 2 daggers, adopted a defensive stance, and with an alert look she revealed to Jiang that someone had launched a surprise attack on them. Luo Sandao decided not to stand idly by. With a determined look, she extended her hand towards the attack and used the skill called Earth Protection Shield, causing a powerful green shield to appear around them. Jiang extended his hand towards the attack, and upon looking a little more closely he soon realized that this fist style was Wushwang's. The energy of Wushwang's fist began to impact against Luo Sandao's shield, causing it to gradually start breaking. Her shield didn't last long, and in a matter of seconds it shattered into pieces. Due to the difference in strength, she and ManhwaCapped were sent flying backward and started bleeding from their mouths. Jiang was the only one left standing. He adopted an offensive stance, and with a look full of determination, he decided it was time to counterattack. Just before Wushwang's fist could reach him, Jiang extended his hand towards the fist, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist which began to halt the attack. Several seconds later, Jiang's body was sent flying backward. He firmly planted his feet on the ground to stop his moving body, and put his hand in front of his face to block any other surprise attack. Little Nine's poisonous mist was so powerful that all that remained of Wushwang's attack was a curtain of smoke. Once the curtain of smoke began to disappear, Wushwang appeared, while his body was surrounded by a powerful energy. He clenched his fist and with a suffocating look, began to approach Jiang. Seeing that even his poison could devour the wind from his fists, it was no wonder that geniuses called Jiang the Demon of Poison. The body of ManhwaCapped fell to the ground behind Jiang. While the smoke curtain was disappearing, he put his hand near his face, started looking at Wushwang, and thought that it was not in vain that he was called the 3rd genius of Daxia, praising him by saying that his punch also had quite a bit of strength. Jiang clenched his fist tightly, causing it to start releasing poisonous mist. With a smile, he asked him if he had come to compete with him for the fierce beast. He extended his hand to one side and prepared to defend himself. Wushwang began walking towards him, started laughing, and revealed to him that he knew this fierce beast had been poisoned by him and all that remained now was its corpse, so there was nothing left to steal. Upon hearing this, Jiang's expression changed. With a serious look, he asked him what he meant by this. Wushwang clashed his fist with his palm, and while his body was surrounded by a red energy, he began to smile, and with an arrogant look asked Jiang not to misunderstand him, as in reality he was just curious and wanted to get to know. Jiang extended his hand towards the sky, and while it was surrounded by Little Nine's poisonous mist, he began to stare at Wushwang and asked him if he was willing to bet his life just to satisfy his curiosity. Wushwang clenched his fist tightly, and with a smile replied yes, adding that one must be at least willing to bet their life. Upon seeing this, Jiang decided it was time to get down to business. He extended his hand towards him and threw the poisonous mist at him. Wushwang began to stare intently at Jiang and with a smile, started to move his fist with great speed, creating powerful energy around his fist in the process. Just before the poisonous mist that Jiang had released could hit Wushwang, he opened his legs, used the skill called 1,000 Feet Walls, and launched a powerful blow towards the attack, creating a powerful barrier in front of him. Then, he launched another powerful blow towards Jiang, and the energy of the blow was so strong that it began to shatter his poisonous mist and started to rapidly advance towards him. Upon seeing this, Jiang, who had his hand extended towards him, couldn't help but be shocked. He soon realized that this attack was very powerful. Just before Wushwang's strike could reach him, he put his hands over his head, jumped and moved away from the area, although in the process he received a small part of the attack. His body began to move backward. He firmly placed his feet on the ground, lowered his head and thought that his boxing style was too fierce and fast, and his poison was not so strong and was very slow. Little Nine put her hands near her face and with a worried look she began to worry about him. Now Jiang had his face and clothes full of scratches. He put his hand near his mouth, started looking at him, and with a smile asked little Nine if she would be able to level up several times if she devoured Wushwang, who had a huge amount of meat and blood. He appeared in his consciousness, and little Nine manifested herself. She placed her hands on her chest and explained that although she had leveled up many times, she was not going to be able to defeat Wushwang, but still she was willing to die instead of Jiang. He turned around, started to sweat, and with a confused look asked her if she was sure. This was the first time he saw little Nine so scared. He concluded that the only way to win was by using the self-destruction ability of the insects, because he had been fighting for a long time. He was now very tired. He put his hands on his knees, and while his body was shaking, he began to look at her, and seeing that she could not defeat him, he ordered her to hide and not come out since he was going to find another way. She decided to listen to him and stay hidden and not go out. Jiang could in no way let little Nine die or everything would be lost. He came out of his consciousness, and while his whole body was trembling, he supported a hand on the ground to rest for a bit. Due to the attack, a smoke screen was created, and as the smoke screen gradually disappeared, Wushwang began to approach him, and seeing that he could no longer move, he thought that he did not seem like someone who could have defeated Xiao Beihan. Jiang decided not to stand idly by. He placed his hand on the ground, began to stare at him intently, and used the ability called Growth of All Things, causing vines to start emerging from the ground. Just before Wushwang could make a move, the vines began to burrow into the ground and created a barrier around his body. He started to look up and couldn't help but start smiling when he saw that this was Jiang's divine talent. According to him, it was interesting to use a barrier to deceive others. He concluded that Xiao Beihan had also been defeated within a barrier. At the same time, in the surveillance room where Yang Guang and Gu Kaishan were, he turned around and explained to him that Jiang had blocked the vision again. Gu Kaishan, who was standing behind him and was observing the barrier, gave Fang Chengyuan the order to be ready to rescue someone if necessary. He put his hand close to his forehead, gave a military salute, and replied with a understood. Yang Guang was somewhat confused, and as a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he explained to him that according to the situation of the battle just now, Jiang Wushwang should be fine and he did not need to be rescued. Gu Kaishan began to stare at the screen and told Yang Guang that he had said this to save Jiang Cheng. Yang Guang turned around and was even more confused. He asked him if he wasn't being a bit hypocritical. Gu Kaishan approached him and asked him to stop talking nonsense since Jiang Wushwang was level 46 while Jiang Chen was level 26. Jiang was his disciple and he just wanted to protect him. At the same time, inside the barrier, Jiang stood up, reached out to the sky and gave the insects the order to come out. Upon hearing the order, thousands of insects shot out from his palm towards the outside. In the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with insects, which began to stare intently at Wushwang. He started looking up, and upon seeing so many insects, he couldn't help but be shocked and become alert at the same time. It didn't take him long to realize that this was Jiang's true ability. Jiang, who had his hand extended towards the sky and was releasing the insects, fell silent. The insects began to advance towards him and prepared to attack. He spread his legs, adopted a defensive stance, used the ability called Move Mountains and Overturn Seas, and prepared to defend himself. While Jiang's eyes were shining, he began to stare at him intently, began pointing at him with his fingers, and started to release even more insects, which began flying towards him. In an instant, thousands of insects appeared in the sky and prepared to attack. While Wushwang's body was surrounded by a golden energy, he prepared to defend himself. He clenched both fists tightly, leaned back, began to look at Jiang, and with a smile used the skill called Overlapping Mountains and Staggered Peaks. Then, he struck the ground using both fists, and by doing this, hundreds of fists made of energy emerged from the ground and began attacking the insects, destroying them into pieces. Upon seeing this, Jiang decided to change tactics. With a serious look, he moved his fingers downward and decided to control the insects to dodge the attacks. While Wushwang was distracted hitting the ground, several insects dodged the attacks and began to quickly approach him. He raised his head, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. Once the insects got close enough, Jiang clenched his fist, and at that moment the insects exploded, creating a large smoke screen. But to his surprise, Wushwang jumped up and came out as if nothing had happened. Jiang started looking up and seeing that he was alive, went on alert and began to wonder what was going on. Wushwang began to descend towards Jiang, and with a smile finally realized how Xiao Beihan had lost. He extended his hands towards the ground, used the skill called Wind Fist, and a powerful golden energy began to move towards Jiang. He put his hands over his head and thought this was not good. The energy began to create great pressure, which started to make Jiang's body begin to fall towards the ground. His energy was so strong that Jiang fell to the ground and his body began to tremble. He soon realized that this wind fist was several times stronger than the previous one. He did not know if this was the strength of an invincible descendant. 2 insects had exploded near him and had not even scratched him. Little by little, Jiang began to run out of strength. With a tired look, he began to look at Wushwang and concluded that to finish him off it was necessary to make dozens or hundreds of insects self-destruct. For him this was very difficult since it had been very complicated for him to raise these insects. He had no other choice. Near Wushwang a large explosion was created and then more began to be created. He did not fall into the trap and quickly stepped back. But to his surprise, this was what Jiang had planned. While he had one hand supported on the ground, he extended the other towards Wushwang, causing several vines to emerge from the ground. Just before the vines could get close, using only one hand, Wushwang blocked the attack and asked him not to exert himself since the fight had ended. Jiang couldn't help but be shocked. He couldn't believe that Wushwang no longer wanted to continue fighting. He asked him what he meant by this. Wushwang, who was standing in front of him, recognized that he was worthy of being his rival. He was only in the first transformation and was already forcing Wushwang to use 80% of his strength. He was eager to fight him when he became stronger. Jiang placed a hand on his knee and as he was getting up, realized that what he had said before about betting his life was to force him to give it his all. All this was just to see if he was a worthy opponent. Wushwang put his hand behind his neck, closed his eyes, began to yawn and told Jiang that he was tired and was going to sleep for a while. After saying this, he asked him if he could take care of the last fierce beast. Jiang began to look at him and with a serious look asked him if he was leaving him the first place. While Wushwang was touching his neck, he turned around and with a calm look explained that he did not mean this. He was just tired. He wanted to leave since he needed to find a good place to sleep for a while. Upon hearing this, Jiang felt a mix of frustration and anger at the same time. He clenched his fist, began to shout and asked him to stop lying, as he was not one of those fools who were affected by pride. Wushwang turned his back on him, and as he was walking away, he closed his eyes and couldn't help but smile, since he knew that he had not been mistaken and that Jiang really was an interesting opponent. At the same time, in the surveillance room, Gu Kaishan crossed his arms, and while watching the screen, told them that one should not rely on strength to oppress the weak. According to him, Wushwang was truly an invincible descendant, and today he had indeed made Gu Kaishan look at him with new eyes. Fang Chengyuan was poisoned again and his mouth filled with foam. Yang Guang approached him, placed both hands on his back and began to help him. Gu Kaishan gave them the order to release the 10th fierce beast on Jiang Chen to let him win first place. A fierce beast with the shape of a centipede and a scorpion's tail began to descend from the sky. It opened its mouth and prepared to attack. Jiang, who was standing on the ground, began to look up, extended his hand and prepared for battle. In a secret realm called Heritage Zero, which was an abandoned village full of fog, night fell. A red-haired woman who was the great disciple of the celestial king of the sword, the older sister of Jai Gang named Hong Yao who was in her 7th transformation, set foot on top of a rock and with a serious look she realized that this place was enough to irritate people. She assumed that those awakened with less than 6 transformations could not enter here. In front of her appeared several spirits which noticed her presence and began to approach. Seeing this, she took a leap, firmly grasped the sword and decided to seek information about Gu Kaishan's apprentice. Just before the spirits could make a move, she began to move at great speed and without much effort cut their bodies in half. In front of her was a tombstone, which was emitting an evil energy similar to Little Nine's poisonous mist. She began to observe the tombstone and it didn't take long for her to realize that it was the source. She didn't know what kind of entity this tombstone was, as it had an ancient presence from about 100 years ago but still remained very strong. The tombstone had several cracks. She approached and decided to use the information database on relics to search for some information about this tombstone. While her eyes were shining and with one hand she was holding the sword, she landed near the tombstone and gave the system the order to activate divine consciousness. Several system windows with information began to unfold around her. She started to stare at the tombstone and used the total awareness skill called speed reading. Several seconds later, the system fully loaded the information, making a photo of an insect appear. The photo began to fall to the ground, but at that moment, she caught it with her hand. She approached the photo, began to look at it and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating, as this insect belonged to the mother insect called 9 miasma wings, an ancient monster, a strange species born in the extremely dark Jiayu realm, who once caused a great catastrophe which almost led to the end of the world in the 4th century. Luckily now this species was extinct. The entire body of this insect was pure black-purple color with 9 wings on its back. It had a strong venom that could transform into poisonous mist. Its toxicity could corrode everything in the world, including spiritual voids. While the tombstone was surrounded by a powerful evil energy, the moon came out, and she thought this was not good since Jiang had a hidden calamity. She decided to tell Master about this as soon as possible. At the same time, in the Tanjiao camp, the beast opened its mouth and prepared to attack. But some time later, its body fell to the ground, and the insects began to devour it. Jiang, who was standing next to it with his hand on his waist, started observing the beast. The insects had devoured a total of 4 beasts. Their devouring value had increased quite a bit. If he got first place in entering camp evaluation, he would be able to complete second transformation very soon. He turned back to where Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao were, reached out his hand to the sky and explained to them that 10 blue flags were more than enough for him to stay in first place. He gave each of them a flag so that at least they could enter the top 10. Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao took the flags, closed their eyes, and with a pleasant smile, they thanked Jiang as they had qualified in this round without doing anything. At the same time, in another part of the camp, Bai Feng and Tan Ying managed to defeat the fierce beast shaped like an eagle. Now its corpse was lying on the ground. Tan Ying, who was lying on the ground next to the beast's corpse, began to wipe her forehead with her hand, and while she was breathing heavily, she couldn't help but feel happy since they had finally managed to defeat the beast. Bai Feng, who was standing beside, realized that the entrance evaluation for the camp was about to end. He thought that Jiang Wuxuang would definitely come in first place. At that moment, the speaker began to sound because the camp entrance evaluation had ended. Those who had advanced to the next round could gather in the square, and those eliminated had to leave the camp within the next 3 minutes, and offenders were going to be punished with death. Jiang began looking at the sky and was somewhat surprised. Seeing that the first round had ended, he didn't take long to realize that the 10 fierce beasts that had been released into the camp had been killed. While his body was giving off little Nine's poisonous mist, he thought that leftovers from beasts were also food. He decided to let out the insects and gave them an order to go look for other fierce beasts and eat everything they could while avoiding people as much as possible. At the same time, the nurses arrived at the camp and began to take away the participants who were injured. On one of the stretchers was Xiao Beihan, who had lost an arm and had it bandaged. He hadn't died. He was conscious and very angry. He started looking up at the sky, clenched his teeth, and felt relieved as he was finally going to be able to leave the camp. He asked Jiang Chen to wait because when he returned home, he would see how his grandfather would punish him. Someone wearing boots stepped onto stage. This person was none other than Gu Kaishan. He crossed his arms and with a serene look gave orders for all those who had advanced in round to come with him to the Forbidden Zone for next test. Upon hearing this, the participants began to converse among themselves. Gu Kaishan had not mentioned doing the next test in the Forbidden Zone. The 8 great Forbidden Zones of China. Each one was a place with natural treasures, but they were also extremely dangerous places. Although some were afraid, others knew that there was nothing to fear since they had the King of the Celestial Sword to guide them. Some had heard that it was not easy to enter the Forbidden Zones, so they did not know how so many people were going to go. While they were conversing, Gu Kaishan grabbed the handle of the sword and slowly began to unsheath it. While his eyes were shining, he started to stare at them, unsheathed the sword, and began to point at them with the blade. He knew that according to Hong Yao's research, Jiang Chen had the forbidden calamity called 9 Wings of Miasma. He began to look at them and decided to use the celestial sword. Then he started swinging the sword quickly and accurately. Dawn was almost upon them, and the person who was supposed to come would arrive soon. He put his knee on the ground, bent down, threw the sword towards the sky, put his other hand near his face, and lowered his head. The participants began looking up at the sky, and witnessing this, they couldn't help but be shocked and start wondering what was happening. At that moment, the ground began to shake, and several seconds later, it started to break. In the area where they were, it detached from the ground and began to fly. Gu Kaishan decided to prepare in advance, as this was the only way he could overcome the time difference. While rocks were floating around him, and his body was surrounded by a powerful energy, he extended his hand to one side and used a technique called Imperial Sword Flight. Upon doing this, his sword came out of the ground, and while it was surrounded by an orange aura, he decided to go to the south of the Jiang River to the Forbidden Zone of Dream Lake. Gradually, the ground began to move towards the mountains. They were amazed to see that this was the strength of Daxia's first king. They couldn't believe that he could move all of Tanjiao's camp. This was something only predecessor Wang Tiandao could do in this world. Jiang turned to Luo Sandow and Mu Hankyu and asked them how much they knew about Dream Lake's Forbidden Zone. Both began to look at him with an uncertain gaze. Luo Sandow was not sure, and Mu Hankyu remembered that her grandfather had mentioned it once. The danger level of Dream Lake was very high, and even though it was the least dangerous forbidden zone in China, its difficulty did not lie in the hidden threat, but in the distortion of time and space. In addition to this area, there were countless dimensional fragments, portals connected to each other. The space within these dimensional fragments was even larger than the blue planet. These fragments were constantly moving, so it was very easy to get lost and not come out. Jiang approached Mu Hankyu and began to look at her with a calm gaze, realizing that the space within Dream Lake was chaotic. He asked her if the space also affected time. With a serious look, she revealed to him that the time within these spaces was also completely different from outside. It was said that 100 years ago, an ordinary worker entered Dream Lake with the mindset of risking it all. He only needed 2 hours to become a 7 transformation king. But as he himself had said, in reality more than 200 years had passed. Mu Hankyu's grandfather had also explored this place. He had been lost for 3 days after entering, but in reality more than 3 years had already passed in the outside world. Jiang was somewhat surprised, and while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he came to the conclusion that the chances of winning or losing at Dream Lake were random. Luo Sandow began to look at him, and she asked him not to worry, since if old man Wang Tiandao dared to take them inside, they could be sure that he already knew a safe route. Jiang began to smile and thought that he wished it was as she was saying. This sounded like even though Dream Lake was a dangerous place, it was also a good place. For some strange reason, he felt that Gu Kaishan was doing this because of him. While the sky was starry, Gu Kaishan crossed his arms. Now that Hong Yao had found the Calamity of the 9 wings, it was likely that Xiao Zhengguo would soon surpass him, and then this secret would not be able to be hidden. He hoped to gain enough time in Dream Lake to go look for allies. The next day, several men arrived at the area where the Tanjiao camp used to be, but now all that remained was a large hole in the ground. They stood on top of a rock and started observing the area, realizing that the King of Celestial Sword had taken away all of Tanjiao's camp, which is considered as best upcoming generation's camp in their southern war zone. They thought he might have rebelled against them. They didn't know why Commander Duan hadn't arrived yet. At that moment, someone jumped. Commander Duan, who had his arms behind his back, began to quickly move towards them and thought that Gu Kaishan was an old fool. He did not know if he was asking him to bet his life with him. 2 minutes ago, Gu Kaishan sent him a message, explaining to Duan that the situation was very urgent. So for this reason he was taking the little ones to the forbidden area for a test. He asked him to continue as usual since he was going to assume all the consequences. Duan approached them, and one of them informed the others that the commander had arrived. Duan, who had his arms behind his back, remained calm and thought that Gu Kaishan was very careless. Now he had left him a lot of problems. The men panicked, and one of them explained that they had arrived late. He feared that they were no longer going to be able to reach them. The other man revealed that his son was still up there. If something happened to him, he didn't know what he was going to do. Duan began to approach them, started looking at the ground, and fell silent. He passed between them, extended his hand back, and asked them to stop making noise, explaining that Gu Kaishan had said they were going for a selection test and would return the same day, so there was nothing to worry about. Upon hearing this, the 2 men couldn't help but be shocked. Duan opened his eyes and began to sweat. With a confused look, he started to wonder if it was really necessary to rush into the forbidden zone for that invincible embryo. He didn't know if he was trying to hide or run away from something. He began to remember what Gu Kaishan had told him, and his expression changed. He couldn't help but be shocked and start wondering if this was about the 9 miasma wings. The arrow that Gu Kaishan had launched reached the city and began to descend towards the headquarters of the Night Watch. The arrow contained a secret message for Uncle Jai Gang. Gu Kaishan revealed to him that Jiang Chen was hiding a major calamity. As his master, he would take him to a forbidden area to hide temporarily. Jai Gang should try to find allies from the Sealed Kings while he was away, since when he returned, he feared there would be a fierce battle. Upon reading the message, Jai Gang could not help but be shocked and become alert at the same time, as he did not know what was happening. A few hours later, he met with Jane Tang, sat on the sofa, bowed his head, put his fist on his forehead, closed his eyes, and remembered that Jiang had killed a member of the Huang family, had cut off Xiao Beihan's arm, and now carried with him a calamity. He feared this was going to be a difficult challenge. Jane Tang sat next to him, and she tried to comfort him by saying that no challenge was easy, but they were going to overcome all challenges since he had decided to protect Jiang Chen no matter what happened. She advised him that it was better to focus on the path ahead and stop worrying about the past, adding that she had spoken with her father who was willing to support them. She began to imagine her father, Duan, Hong Yao, and Gu Kaishan. Now they had the Celestial Sword King, Jai Gang's elder sister, her father, and Commander Duan. With 4 sealed king powers, they were going to be able to handle any storm that came their way. Jai Gang stood up, started walking towards the door and thought she was right. His elder sister had already gone to meet the master. Now he decided to visit the sealed king of the Mu family and merchant Luo family. Even if he had to lie, he was willing to fight for more allies for Jiang. Jane Tang began observing him and she remained silent. He turned his head back, started looking at her with a serious gaze, and decided that if things went from bad to worse, he would use the same energy he had when he burst into Xiao family and give it his all. Upon hearing this, Jane Tang, who had a cheerful look, began to smile since it had been years since she last saw Jai Gang so excited. Several hours later, day broke, and Gu Kaishan's sword grew huge and positioned itself under the island. He began to use his power, and they started heading towards the Forbidden Zone. He asked Hong Yao what she thought they should do after returning. Hong Yao, who was chewing gum, blew a bubble and with a calm look thought that Jiang's 9 miasma wings were cool. She wished she could raise one herself. Gu Kaishan quickly moved his finger back and launched a small arrow which destroyed Hong Yao's bubblegum bubble. He slightly turned his head towards her and with a serious look called her silly girl, and asked if she could be serious for once. Hong Yao began to look at him with a tender gaze and explained that Grand Xia had no tolerance whatsoever towards calamities. If even he couldn't solve it, she would be even less able to do so. After saying this, she asked him if he could take down a great Zhengguo general in one blow. Gu Kaishan became enraged and gave her a soft blow on the head, asking her to watch her tone. She closed her eyes, began to touch her head and started screaming in pain. He closed his eyes and began to imagine his disciples. He had a lot of reputation, yet he ended up taking in a group of strange disciples like them. He began to imagine Hong Yao raising her spear. She was always noisy and rowdy. She never cared about anything. According to him, Jai Gang was a stubborn and obstinate person who had a one-track mind. Jiang Chen had divine talent, but still insisted on playing with the forbidden. A small bump appeared on Hong Yao's head. She approached him and with a smile asked why he was so determined to protect Jiang Chen. He turned his back on her, opened his eyes, and while observing the landscape, he asked her if she really wanted to know the reason. Then, he raised his head, began to look towards the sky and explained to her that when he had taken her as a disciple, it had only been because she was wearing red armor and he thought it looked cheerful. As for taking Jai Gang, it had been even more random. He had mistaken Gu Kaishan for a regular client outside of a club. At that time, when the heir of the Xiao family tried to forcefully marry Tang Jin, Jai Gang went to stop him, and Gu Kaishan was willing to give his life to protect him. The men from the Xiao family pounced on Gu Kaishan and the battle began. Jai Gang took advantage of the commotion, grabbed Tang Jin in his arms and fled from the area. Not everything needed a reason. He was doing this because he cared about Jiang. He began to look down with a sad gaze since now Jiang Chen was the same. At the moment he had met him, he had known that they were going to get along well, so he simply had accepted Jai Gang's wishes. If Jiang was his disciple, then there was no reason not to protect him. Hong Yao approached him and thought that he was the best master in the world. He acted tough, but in reality, he was very protective. He asked her to stop flattering him. According to her, there was only one way to truly protect Jiang Chen. She rested her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile mentioned the supreme military commander of the Great Xia, one of the 3 invincible supremes. Gu Kaishan began to look at her with a calm gaze and remained silent. She opened her eyes, started to caress his shoulder with her finger, and revealed to him that the only way to protect Jiang was with the help of Jiang Wuxuang's grandfather, the martial god Jiang Xuanji. At the same time in Paju Cave, a battlefield of countless races, someone clenched their fist tightly and began to quickly bring it down towards the ground. Several men began to approach a man wearing a red cape, but at that moment, he struck the ground hard, breaking it into pieces and creating a large shockwave, which began to expand everywhere, repelling the men. The shockwave was so powerful that the men lost consciousness and began to fall to the ground. The man wearing the red cape was the invincible martial god named Jiang Xuanji. While his body was surrounded by powerful energy, he clenched his fist tightly, stood up, started walking around the area, and seeing that countless races had dared to invade Great Xia, he decided to kill them all mercilessly. His blow was so powerful that it created a large hole in the cave floor. Standing in front of him were several more men. He began to walk towards them and concluded that after this battle, the countless races should calm down for a while. He gave the order to the men to guard the entrance of the cavern. They addressed him as martial god and responded with a "understood, master." At that moment, someone with energy similar to Jiang Wushuang started contacting him, leaving him somewhat confused since he did not know why he was being contacted now when Wushuang was supposed to be at the Tanjiao camp. But to his surprise, Gu Kaishan began appearing in front of him, addressed him as martial god and told him it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Shu Enji began to stare at him and couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and go on alert. Seeing that the Celestial Sword King had contacted him through Wushuang, he thought he had encountered problems in the camp, so he asked Gu Kaishan to speak clearly. He reached out his hand towards the sky and with a calm look replied not entirely, adding that he was doing very well. He wanted to make a deal with him. He began to imagine Jiang Cheng surrounded by the poisonous mist of Little Nine and revealed to him that he had taken a new disciple named Jiang Chen, who had a divine level creation class, but possessed the calamity called 9 miasma wings. He wanted him to protect his life. Shu Enji began to stare at him, and upon hearing that Jiang possessed the ancient calamity 9 miasma wings, he could not help but go into shock. According to him, Gu Kaishan must be joking since Great Xia had always believed it was better to kill than let any calamity go free, asking him if he believed the martial god was omnipotent. Gu Kaishan remained calm and with a puzzled look asked him if this was true. In response, Shu Enji asked him to name his terms. While his eyes were shining, he began to look at him and asked if he had heard of the Tiexu Hall in Yunmeng Marsh, adding that only he knew the way to all Grand Xia. He could take Jiang Wushuang and give him something fortuitous. Shu Enji's eyes also began to shine and he started imagining the Tiexu Hall, the legendary treasure of Celestial Dao. If Wushuang could go there, his cultivation would advance a lot. He reached out to one side and his cape began to float. He could accept Gu Kaishan's conditions, but with one condition. Jiang Chen was not allowed to use 9 miasma wings during the Prodigy tournament, and if he couldn't obtain first place in the overall ranking of Great Xia's prodigies, he himself would throw him into the battlefield of myriad races for him to defend himself. Gu Kaishan turned his head back, and with an indecisive look began to think about it. Shu Enji turned his back on him and as he was walking away, started looking at the ground and explained that if he really wanted to save Jiang's life, then he had no other choice. Gu Kaishan began to look down and with a desperate look agreed, since sending Jiang to the battlefield was still better than being killed by General Xiao and the others when they returned. Shu Enji began to walk, and while he was looking at the ground, he remembered that the 9 miasma wings was an ancient exotic species. According to him, it was impossible for her to reach a natural calamity scale in this era. Moreover, this generation of Great Xia had produced 3 other divine talents, and Jiang was only the 4th and he was just in the creation type. He knew that without using the calamity, Jiang would not be able to pass Wushuang's test, let alone be able to finish first. He clenched his fist and while his cape was flying, with a determined look he thought that even if by some miracle Jiang managed to cause some trouble, as a martial god, he could eliminate any evil spirit from the world in seconds. At the same time, the island reached up to the Forbidden Zone, which was a place full of portals. Jiang began to observe the place and with a surprised look realized that they had already officially entered the Yunmeng Swamp. He asked the others if they remembered the way to get here. Mu Hankyu was dumbfounded and explained to him that remembering the path in these constantly changing dimensional fragments was impossible. The Celestial Sword King had relied on aura to guide the way. It was said that Yunmeng Swamp had 10 levels, with the 10th and 9th being relatively safer. The deeper they went, the easier it would be to get lost. Her grandfather had gotten lost at the 7th level years ago. Jiang sat on the ground, joined his hands and prepared to meditate a bit. He felt that he was already lost. Now that the path could not be remembered with eyes and brain, he decided to sit down and meditate, letting the spiritual sense guide them. Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao also sat down, joined their hands and they too prepared to meditate. Jiang entered his mind where the tree of all things was located. For now there was no wind in his mind. However, the tree was moving towards something and he did not know if it could be marking the way. He closed his eyes and concluded that there was something ahead that the tree was desperately longing for. Looking a little more closely, he saw that a rose-shaped fruit had grown on the tree. At that moment, an information window appeared. He had obtained a red functional fruit, which was a skill copy card. After using it, he could randomly copy one of the target's abilities and merge it with himself. The copied ability had no class restrictions. There was a possibility that the copied ability could be improved or worsened during the process. And last but not least, he must complete the copy within 3 hours or the card would expire. He began to observe the system window with a perplexed look and could not help but be shocked to see that this card allowed him to copy abilities and also it had no restrictions. In the Tanjiao camp, everyone was top-notch prodigies, so he could choose anyone he wanted. The most valuable targets were going to be Jiang Wuxuang, Bai Feng, and Tang Ying. He closed his eyes again and decided that he couldn't do this since the ability to copy was random and he could end up with a useless ability. According to him, it was difficult to choose. He only had 3 hours to copy the ability, so he didn't know if it was simply better to take the risk. While he was distracted deep in thought, Gu Kaishan drew everyone's attention. He put his foot on the rock and revealed to everyone that they had arrived at the 6th layer of Yunmeng Swamp, called Takesu Realm. Ahead was Takesu Hall, the place he was taking them to, asking everyone to get ready. Jiang came out of his thoughts, began to look at Gu Kaishan and decided to test the copy card with the master. He couldn't help but start smiling since he remembered that Gu Kaishan always said that he knew a move, and had even said that he wanted to take him as a disciple, so he simply decided to copy the move and consider it as an early lesson. Some time later, the island reached a temple, which was on top of a floating island, and the only way to go up was by using the magical steps, which were floating. This was the Takesu Temple. The participants began to talk among themselves. They were going to become very strong this time since previously in the Magic City there was a legendary sealed king who had become king here in one step. And not only that, even he had become one of the 3 invincibles of Great Summer. Moreover, he wasn't the only one since the Great Dreamer had also attained enlightenment here. Next to the temple, there were some beautiful mountains. It had a trial called the Hall of Great Emptiness. There were 3 levels. On the first one there were 1008 steps. Each time someone climbed a step, there was a chance to receive a heavenly reward. Gu Kaishan, who had one hand behind his back, extended the other towards the temple and explained that the second level was called the Steel of Great Void. The Great Dreamer was the only person who had managed to reach this level. As for the third level, it was inside the temple. No one so far had managed to enter. This was going to be the last test. Out of 150 people, the first 10 were going to be selected according to the number of steps they climbed to represent the Jiangnan War Zone and enter the general final of geniuses from the 8 main war zones of Daxia. Once he finished explaining this, the temple test began. Everyone got excited, started smiling, and began running towards the steps. With a smile full of excitement, Luo Sandao also started running, but Jiang grabbed her by the shoulder, stopped her and said it wasn't good to be in such a hurry since the temple wasn't going anywhere. Unlike the others, Tang Yin, Bai Feng, and another boy sat on the ground, put their hands together and began to meditate. Jiang slightly turned his head back, and with a serious look asked Luo Sandao to watch carefully since none of them were in a hurry and they were all meditating to adjust their mental state. Luo Sandao thought Jiang was right, so she, Mu Hankyu, and Jiang sat on the ground, put their hands together and began to meditate. Mu Hankyu mentioned that in a place like the Takesu Temple, each person could only ascend once, so it was better to adjust their mental state to the maximum before ascending. Hong Yao sat on top of her spear and it began to fly. Gu Kaishan, who was standing on top of the spear, put his arms behind his back, started observing them, and upon seeing that they could remain calm without haste, he couldn't help but praise them. Jiang started to look up and decided to copy the skill of the Heavenly Sword King before climbing the steps, to prevent the copy card from becoming invalid. He began with the skill copying, hoping that the old man had not deceived him. Gu Kaishan started to stare at others and a system window appeared as a target to copy. Jiang selected Gu Kaishan. The system warned him that there was a possibility that the copied skill could degrade or improve during the process. After this warning, it asked him if he wished to start copying a random skill. Jiang began to stare at Gu Kaishan and responded with a yes, thinking that it was time to start with this. He hoped to have a little more luck. He did not ask to improve his skills, he just wanted them not to degrade. Another system window appeared to inform him that the skill he was copying was called Opening of the Sky. It was of legendary quality. He stood up and couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised and alert at the same time. He felt relieved since the old man hadn't deceived him and this move really existed. The skill card began to copy Gu Kaishan's skill, and suddenly Jiang was teleported to another place. He started to inspect the place and couldn't help but be shocked, and it didn't take long for him to realize where he was. A sword appeared in his hands, swinging it with precision and strength, cutting through space and time. Jiang was perplexed as this force was the same that Gu Kaishan had with the sword. Jiang was in a forest and he was shirtless. He grabbed the sword tightly, began to observe the blade with a confused look, and started to wonder why he was practicing with the sword. While the leaves were falling, with a look full of determination, he swung the sword precisely and cut the leaf in half. Then, he raised the sword above his head, although it seemed that not much time had passed. Jiang had even grown a beard. He raised the sword to the sky and a powerful blizzard began to form around the blade. He used all his strength and launched a powerful slash towards the ground. His attack was so powerful that it split the mountains in half. Jiang already had long hair and a long white beard. He had become an old man. While with one hand he was holding the sword, with a tired look, he began to look to one side and thought that man follows the earth follows the sky, and he follows the Tao. The progress of skill copying reached 120%, and he obtained several skills. The first was called Man's Strength of Purple Quality. The second was called Earth Knife of Purple Quality. The third was called Sky Knife of Legendary Quality. And the last was called Great Path Power of Shadow Knife Quality. Jiang, who was sitting on the ground and was meditating, was somewhat surprised. He had incredible luck since not only had he copied everything, he had also broken down the celestial sword into 4 styles. With a calm look, Hong Yao explained to Gu Kaishan that Jiang Wushuang and the others had already started climbing and only Jiang remained here, adding that at the beginning of the test is when benefits were given. She did not know what had happened to Jiang and if he had fallen asleep. Gu Kaishan started to look at Jiang and remained thinking in silence. Several minutes passed, and Jiang, Luo Sandao, and Mu Henkyu continued meditating without moving. Seeing this, Gu Kaishan thought that this was a bit strange since adjusting the state did not take so much time. Hong Yao's spear began to tremble. Witnessing this, she couldn't help but be shocked and go on alert. She asked the master why her spear's heart was resonating. Gu Kaishan's eyes filled with surprise and he began to look at Jiang. The celestial sword beneath the island also started to tremble, and he revealed to her that not only was her spear resonating, but even the heart of his sword was resonating. Upon hearing this, Hong Yao panicked. She didn't know if Jiang had succeeded. Back then, it was also a rare talent, but her mind was inflexible. She had always wanted to break down the celestial sword, saying that it could be divided into 4 movements, which had led her to be stuck at the master level for so many years of cultivation. She couldn't believe that finally someone had a revelation now. Gu Kaishan started to stare at Jiang and realized that the sensation that had just appeared and disappeared was very familiar. He couldn't believe this was happening and thought it was a divine illusion produced by the temple. Hong Yao was somewhat surprised and she asked the master to pay attention since Jiang had begun to move towards the steps. Jiang started to walk towards the steps and Hong Yao became somewhat nervous as she did not know which step he would be able to reach. She had tried very hard and had only managed to reach step 301. And Jai Gang was even worse, as he had only managed to reach step 298. She did not know how the great dreamer had reached the top. According to her, this was terrifying. At that moment, a list appeared in the sky. The invincible descendant Jiang Wushuang had reached step 289. The little god killer of the East Sea Baifeng had reached step 253. The Tianji killer named Lu Tangying had reached step 248. The young master of the city of 10,000 demons Lazy had reached step 211. Mu Henkyu had reached step 199 and Luo Sandao had reached step 170. The participants began to converse among themselves. If they had known they were going to come to the temple, they would have prepared mind potions. The first 100 steps were tests of illusions, and the following steps were even more difficult. Each step was going to feel like carrying several mountains. One of them drew attention from others and asked them to be quiet since the poisonous demon Jiang was about to start climbing, adding that surely he was going to be another Jiang Wushuang. Jiang started to look at the ground and remained silent. Then he approached the step, lifted his foot and with a determined look thought that if the first steps were tests of illusions, with his mental strength there should be no problem. Once he stepped on the first step, his eyes filled with surprise and he couldn't help but be shocked and go on alert. At that moment, Xiao Beihen's grandfather appeared. While his eyes were shining, he began to unsheathe the sword with one hand, and with a suffocating look decided to finish him off without leaving him a place to be buried, since he couldn't believe that he had dared to mess with the legitimate grandson of the Xiao family. Jiang panicked and began to wonder if he was Xiao Zhenguo. He unsheathed the sword, leaped forward and prepared to attack. Seeing this, Jiang started covering his head with his arms and prepared to defend himself. Due to the difference in strength, Jiang's body was sent flying backward, and he fell on his butt against the ground. At that moment, Jai Gang and the others appeared in front of him to protect him. Jiang, who was behind them, panicked and asked them to flee from here. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Zhenguo moved at an incredible speed and using the sword, cut their bodies into pieces, approached Jiang and with a look full of hatred decided to finish off anyone who stood in his way. The blood of Jai Gang and the others fell on Jiang's face, and seeing that they were dead, he couldn't help but be terrified. He climbed completely onto the step, and while his body was trembling, he began to cry. Hong Yao and Gu Kaishan approached a little, and upon witnessing this, she began to wonder if little Jiang had gotten stuck on the first step. But Gu Kaishan explained that this step tested the four-dimensional system: spirit, physicality, agility, and strength. All the prodigies of the camp had been tempered from a young age with celestial materials and earthly treasures, but Jiang was the only self-taught one. In this trial, he was going to suffer a great disadvantage. Upon hearing this, she panicked because if Jiang lost, then the god of war would send him to the battlefield. Back to the test, Xiao Zhenguo defeated Jiang, who was now on his knees on the ground. He accepted defeat and was willing to die since anyway he had harmed everyone and no longer wanted to live. At that moment, a white branch appeared around Xiao Zhenguo's sword. Jiang began to raise his head and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. A white branch pierced through Xiao Zhenguo's body, causing him to gradually begin to disappear. Jiang, who was kneeling, started observing this and couldn't help but wonder if this was the illusory world. Now that Xiao Zhenguo had been defeated, Jiang left the illusory world. He couldn't believe that he had just fallen into an illusion, but it felt too real. But then he thought that it couldn't be real. Uncle Jai Gang and the others had been killed, and instead of fighting for his life, he had been seeking death. He clenched his fist tightly and while blushing, prepared to step onto the next step. Seeing this illusory world mocking him, he called upon the spiritual tree and decided to give it a good beating. Jiang prepared to put his foot on the next step, and then two system windows appeared in front of him, causing him to go on alert. He obtained 5 Star Wish fragments. 1,000 fragments could be combined into a complete Star Wish fragment if the user had a skill level between level 1 and level 3. Consuming 10 star fragments could increase by 1 level, and if the user had a skill level between level 4 and level 6, it would require 100 star fragments to improve. Jiang began to observe the system windows, and he couldn't help but start smiling upon seeing that he had obtained 5 Star Wish fragments. The market price of 1 fragment was millions. He had just started and the system had already given him such a generous reward. These fragments were not going to serve him for improving skills, but however, if he sold them, then he could get enough money for the little insects to feed well for a while. Jiang stepped on the second step and several seconds passed with no illusion. Then he appeared in his subconscious, and slowly the branches of the spiritual tree began to grow larger and larger. He started to observe this and couldn't help but become alert. Jiang began to smile as he realized that the spiritual tree of all things had directly blocked the illusion. For him, this tree was incredible. Jiang stood still on the second step while the other geniuses who had not yet begun to climb started looking at Jiang and thought that he was acting strangely since just a moment ago, on the first step, he was crying and angry. He had been stuck on the first step for a long time, and now on the second step, he was laughing out loud. Seeing him like this, they thought that he would not be able to pass beyond the second step and would be considered the weakest of all. Gu Kaishan and Hong Yao simply stayed watching Jiang's behavior in silence. Upon hearing the mockery of others, with a determined look he decided to show everyone what a crushing victory was. But then he looked back and seeing that the elder Gu Kaishan was watching, he decided it was better to pretend a little so as not to draw too much attention. He started looking forward and was somewhat terrified to see that Jiang Wuxuang had already reached step number 300. For now, he decided it was better to surpass him and then think about what to do next. With a disappointed look, Hong Yao explained to Gu Kaishan that little Jiang Chen had gotten stuck on the second step. According to her, he was not going to be able to reach step number 10. Gu Kaishan began to look at Jiang and he couldn't help but be in shock. He asked Hong Yao to stop talking and watch what he was doing. Jiang prepared to put his foot on step number 3, and again the spiritual tree blocked the illusion. He put his arms behind his back, started to hum a song, and without much effort began to go up step by step, as if this were just a simple game for children, leaving everyone in shock and with their mouths open. They did not know what was happening and how Jiang had climbed 100 steps at once just by singing. They came to the conclusion that he had deliberately gotten stuck on the first 2 steps because he liked the illusions of those 2 levels. They no longer had any doubt that he really was the master of poison. In the blink of an eye, Jiang surpassed Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao. He started waving goodbye to her with his hand and while humming told them that he was going to climb 300 steps without fear. Mu Hankyu began to look at Jiang with a gaze full of love, and she couldn't help but start to blush like a tomato upon seeing that he was singing to cheer her up. She decided to give her best effort. Luo Sandao thought that her benefactor was incredible, but the song he was singing was too embarrassing. Seeing the ease with which Jiang was climbing, Hong Yao couldn't help but be perplexed and start sweating. She didn't know if the Taeksu Hall test had any flaws. She couldn't believe that Jiang had climbed more than 200 steps so quickly and without slowing down. Gu Kaishan began to look at Jiang and with a calm gaze told her that even he had not seen anyone do what Jiang was doing. Jiang passed by and surpassed two geniuses who were left terrified. No one knew what was happening or how Jiang could climb so fast. They did not know if he was climbing the same steps as them or if they were in an illusion. Not far away, on the highest steps were Jiang Wuxuang, Tan Ying, and Bai Feng standing on the same step. Jiang started to look up and upon seeing this, became alert. He did not know why the three had stopped on step number 299 and were not advancing. Gu Kaishan began to observe them and explained to Hong Yao that every 300 steps formed a level. Even for the celestial geniuses it was difficult to surpass it. With a cheerful look, she remembered that she had also had to give her all at that time to pass that step. After that, each step felt like the weight of a mountain. She did not know who would be the first among the celestial geniuses to cross this first level. Jiang reached step number 298, and the three turned around. Jiang Wuxuang could not help but start smiling since Jiang had not disappointed him. Tang Ying could not help but feel happy seeing that Jiang had caught up with them so quickly, while on the other side, Bai Feng simply remained silent. Jiang Wuxuang began to smile and his body started to emit a powerful energy, making several chains appear. He decided to take the first step, leaving Tang Ying in shock. Jiang began to look at the chains with a surprised expression. He had a divine level class and did not know if Jiang Wuxuang had a double divine level class. He had never heard of this before, and did not know if these chains were actually meant to conceal his power. At that moment, one of the chains broke in half. Jiang Wuxuang clenched his fist tightly and stepped up to the next level, breaking all the chains. He closed his eyes, extended his hands to the sides, and a purple energy began to enter his chest. As the purple energy was expanding everywhere, Bai Feng started to look at Jiang Wuxuang with a perplexed look, and he did not take long to realize that this energy was the reward for having reached step number 300. Tan Ying was speechless, but for her this was not surprising since after all, he was Jiang Wuxuang. He turned around and while his body was releasing purple energy, he revealed that in the Palace of Emptiness there were 18 steps. The last step every 300 steps was the most difficult. By climbing it they would be able to obtain rewards. This step seemed to be testing willpower, but in reality it was a review of soul strength. He started to look at Jiang with a lost gaze and mentioned that his origin was not good, since as a child he had not been purified by the treasures of heaven and earth. Compared to them, his foundations were somewhat deficient. He suggested to him to proceed with caution and not rush into breaking barriers. He should slowly seek a way among them. While he was explaining this, Jiang took a small leap and climbed to step 300, leaving everyone speechless. Jiang approached him and with a confused look asked if it was really so difficult to climb this step and also if he was acting just like him. Jiang Wuxuang was somewhat shocked and angry at the same time. He was unable to believe that Jiang had climbed this step so easily. A system window appeared, and for having climbed 300 steps of the Taeksu Hall, he obtained a origin crystal as a reward. A green crystal appeared in Jiang's hand. He started to look at it and couldn't help but feel happy since this was an incredible reward. Although the insects could not use it. He had heard that Uncle Jai Gang had been in the third transformation for many years, but thanks to this, he had been able to ascend to the fourth transformation. This crystal was much more powerful than the reward that Jiang Wuhusang had obtained. Little Nine manifested, and with a hungry look asked Jiang to climb faster since she wanted to eat the trail. Jiang started to look at the Taeksu Hall and with a confused look asked her if she was referring to the trail that was on top of the hall, to which she replied with a yes. At that moment, Little Nine's stomach began to growl, leaving Jiang somewhat confused. She started forcing Jiang to climb faster. He asked her to wait since even though she really wanted to eat, it wasn't necessary to push him. Tang Ying and Bai Feng turned around and upon seeing this, they were left speechless, while on the other side, Jiang Wuxuang became furious. He clenched his teeth tightly and began to look at him with a gaze full of rage. He could not allow Jiang to surpass him. He started to shake his fists, and 8 hands appeared behind him and he began to climb like crazy so as not to let Jiang surpass him. Bai Feng was somewhat surprised to see that the war god Jiang Wuxuang had refined his body. His eyes filled with rage and he could not help but become furious, letting out a suffocating energy. For him, people like them were truly annoying. According to him, they should die. He extended his hands towards the sky and used the technique Blood of Gods and Demons called Dye the Sky Blue. His body began to release ghosts. He decided not to let them surpass him and also started to climb quickly. Several seconds later, two geniuses arrived at them, and upon seeing that Tang Ying was standing and not competing with them, they thought this was very strange. She turned to them and with a serene look, explained that she was an assassin and could not be compared to those ogres. One of the men felt relieved to hear this, but at that moment, Tang Ying began to smile and little by little her body started to transform. She transformed into a snake and with a murderous look, she also began to climb quickly. The two men were left speechless and then hugged and thought that Mr. Tiger had not deceived them and that people were really too terrifying. For them, the four were admirable geniuses, but Jiang, who was climbing as if nothing, was the most terrifying. Hong Yao was surprised to see that Jiang Wuxuang had made 8 hands appear. Bai Feng had gone crazy and Tang Ying had transformed into a snake. According to her, Jiang was really impressive since with his own strength he had caused everyone to lose their composure. Gu Kaishin closed his eyes and started laughing out loud, and told her that it was no wonder that he was his favorite disciple. In the blink of an eye, Jiang reached the top. He was the second in history to have achieved this. Now that he had reached the top, he could not help but feel somewhat relieved and relaxed. Hong Yao noticed something and her eyes filled with terror. She did not know what Jiang was going to do. Jiang extended his hand towards the sky, letting out the insects. He decided to let them out voluntarily so they could do whatever they wanted.